I'm Robert Sumwalt, and I'm honored to serve as the chairman of the NTSB. And joining us today are my colleagues on the board, Vice Chairman Bruce Landsberg, Member Jennifer Hamady, and joining us for the first time are our newest members, Member Michael Graham and Member Tom Chapman. Welcome to the board. Today we meet in open session as required by the government and the Sunshine Act to consider a collision involving a Tesla Model X SUV operating with partial driving automation in Mountain View, California on March the 23rd, 2018. The vehicle struck a damaged crash attenuator at about 71 miles per hour and then was struck by two other cars. The Tesla's high voltage battery was breached in the collision and a post-crash fire ensued. Witnesses pulled the Tesla driver from the vehicle before it was engulfed in flames, and tragically, he later died at the hospital. And on behalf of all of us at the NTSB, we'd like to offer our sincerest condolences to the family and friends of that driver. Truly, our goal for being here is to learn what happened so that others don't go through what you're going through. In addition, the driver of one of the other vehicles was also hurt, and we wish that driver a full recovery as well. This crash had many facets that we will discuss today, but what struck me the most about the circumstances of this crash was the lack of system safeguards to prevent foreseeable misuses of technology. Instead, the industry keeps implementing technology in such a way that people get injured or killed. And the industry, in some cases, is ignoring the NTSB's recommendations intending to help prevent such tragedies. Equally disturbing is that government regulators have provided scant oversight, ignoring, in some cases, this board's recommendations for system safeguards. The car in this crash was not a self-driving car. As I've said many times before, you cannot buy a self-driving car today. We're not there yet. This car had level 2 automation, meaning that it could only drive itself under certain conditions. And most importantly, that an attentive driver must supervise the automation at all times, ready to take control. But the driver in this case, like too many others like him, was using level 2 automation, as if it were full automation. So let me say, if you own a car with partial automation, you do not own a self-driving car. So don't pretend that you do. This means that when driving in the supposed self-driving mode, you can't sleep. You can't read a book. You can't watch a movie or a TV show. You can't text. And you can't play video games. And yet, that's precisely what we found that this driver was doing. He was playing a video game on his smartphone when his car veered over into the median and struck the barrier in the median. Now, it's foreseeable that some drivers will attempt to inappropriately use driving automation systems. And to counter this possibility, in 2017, as a result of a crash investigation, we issued 2 recommendations to 6 automobile manufacturers. And of the 6, 5 of those manufacturers have responded favorably, stating that they are working to implement that recommendation. But sadly, one manufacturer has ignored us. And that manufacturer is Tesla. We ask that recommendation recipients respond to us within 90 days. That's all we ask. Give us a response within 90 days. Tell us what you intend to do. But it's been 881 days since these recommendations were sent to Tesla, and we've heard nothing. We're still waiting. Let me circle back to the issue of driver distraction, one that involves the role of employers. Employers have a critical role in fighting distracted driving. And at the NTSB, we believe in leading by example. Over a decade, under the leadership of my former colleague and NTSB Chairman Debbie Hersman, the NTSB implemented a broad-reaching policy which bans personal electronic devices, or PEDs, while driving. We know that such policies can save lives. The driver in this crash was employed by Apple, certainly a tech leader. But when it comes to recognizing the need for a company PED policy, Apple is not a leader at all. They're lagging because they don't have such a policy. Today, we will discuss the importance of company PED policies. So the flow of the show this afternoon will be that the board will lay out the pertinent facts and analysis as determined in this investigation. They will lay out draft findings, a draft probable cause, draft recommendations, and we on the board will question the staff to ensure that the report that we adopt today truly provides the best opportunity to enhance safety. The public docket for this crash contains over 1,900 pages of additional relevant material, and it's available on our website at ntsb.gov. Dockets and other reports of other crashes using partially automated vehicles that our investigators will discuss today. Those reports in the public docket for those reports is also available on our website. And once the report from today's board meeting is completed, and it will take about 3 weeks, it too will be posted on our website. So now, Deputy Managing Director Paul Sledzik, if you will kindly introduce the staff.
Thank you, Chairman. A few announcements before we begin. First, I kindly request that if you've not done so already, please take a moment to silence your mobile phone and other electronic devices. There are 2 exits from the boardroom. Here at the front of the auditorium on either side of the dais, you'll see the exit signs underneath the screens. Go down the stairs into the lower lobby area through the doors. It'll take you into the lower part of the office building, and then follow the exit signs from there to exit the building. The other exit from this room is through the way that you would enter the boardroom, in this situation behind you. Walk up the aisles, proceed out the 2 sets of glass doors, and proceed to the left and walk down to the end of that sidewalk. NTSB staff and security will direct you in the event of an emergency, and will also direct you when you're able to come back into the boardroom. There is also an AED device located in the lobby of the boardroom if needed, and security personnel can call 911. If you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to ask an NTSB staff member. Seated at the panel this afternoon, unless otherwise noted, are staff members from the Office of Highway Safety. On the first row to my right is Dr. Robert Malloy, who is the director in that office. To Dr. Malloy's right is Dr. Thomas Barth, who's the investigator in charge for this accident. To Dr. Barth's right is Mr. Don Carroll, the project manager for this accident investigation. To Mr. Carroll's right is Dr. Ensar Becic, who's the human performance and automation lead for this accident. And to Dr. Becic's right is Mr. Bob Squire, who's the technical reconstructionist for this accident. Behind Mr. Squire is Dr. Dan Horak, a mechanical engineer from the Office of Research and Engineering. To Dr. Horak's left is Mr. Ken Bragg, who is an investigator in charge for the Culver City accident in California, which will also be mentioned in this discussion this afternoon. To Mr. Bragg's left is Ms. Julie Perot, who's the Safety Recommendations Specialist for Highway Reports from our Office of Safety Recommendations and Communications. To her left is Dr. Carl Schulteis, who's the Chief of the Vehicle Performance Division in the Office of Research and Engineering. To Dr. Schulteis' left is Ms. Kathleen Silbaugh, our General Counsel, and to Ms. Silbaugh's left is Ms. Darlene Hatchett, who is the Director of our Office of Safety Recommendations and Communications. Behind Ms. Hatchett is Mr. Mark Banyard, who's handling audio, visual, and timing from the Office of Highway Safety. To Mr. Banyard's right is Dr. Lysandra Gari-Vega, who is Chief of the Report Development in the Highway Office. And to her right is Ms. Monica Mitchell, who is the editor for the report today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Barth, who will have some opening comments.
Good afternoon, Chairman Sumwalt, Vice Chairman Landsberg, and members of the board. Today, staff is presenting for your consideration a report on the collision between a sport utility vehicle and a crash attenuator. The vehicle was operating with a partial driving automation system activated at the time of the collision. The crash occurred on Friday, March 23rd, 2018, at 9:27 a.m. Pacific Standard Time in Mountain View, California, at the U.S. Highway 101 interchange with State Route 85. A 2017 Tesla Model X electric-powered sport utility vehicle operated by a 38-year-old driver was traveling south on U.S. Highway 101 from the driver's home in Foster City to his workplace in Sunnyvale. For much of the trip, the driver was operating the SUV with the partial driving automation system engaged. Tesla refers to the suite of advanced driver assistance systems as Autopilot. Mr. Carroll will discuss the Autopilot system later during his presentation. As the SUV approached the interchange, there was a paved gore area dividing the main travel lanes of U.S. Highway 101 from the left exit ramp to State Route 85. The gore area is highlighted in yellow for this presentation. At the end of the gore area, there was a crash attenuator shown in the red box and inset photo on the right side of the screen. It had been previously collapsed from another crash it was non-operational. The following slides depict the pre-crash motion of the Tesla. The SUV was traveling about 64 miles per hour and following a vehicle in the lane ahead at a distance of about 84 feet as it approached the gore area. The photo in the lower half of the slide depicts the driver's view of the approach to the gore area. This image was captured during a drive-through of the scene taken by an NTSB investigator 2 days after the crash. When the SUV was 5.9 seconds from impacting the crash attenuator, the vehicle steered left, about 5.6 degrees at the steering wheel, toward the gore area. At the time of the steering movement, the Tesla Autopilot system did not detect any driver-applied steering wheel torque. When the SUV became fully positioned in the gore area, about 3.9 seconds prior to the crash, the Autopilot lane keeping assist system centered the vehicle between the lines delineating the left and right side of the gore. At this time, no vehicle was detected ahead of the SUV. Because the Autopilot was still engaged, the Tesla began to accelerate from 61.9 miles per hour to the previous cruise control setting of 75 miles per hour. During the final 3.9 seconds, the SUV accelerated from the 61.9 miles per hour to an impact speed of 70.8 miles per hour. Shown on the left is a pre-crash photo depicting cones and a plastic barricade that was placed in advance of the damaged attenuator 3 days prior to the crash. On the day of the crash, the plastic barricade was lying on the ground and the SUV passed over it as it accelerated to the crash attenuator. The forward collision warning system did not provide an alert, and the automatic emergency braking system did not activate as the Tesla SUV approached the attenuator. Dr. Betchick will discuss the limitations of collision avoidance systems later in his presentation. Data also showed that the driver of the SUV did not apply the brakes and did not initiate any steering movement to avoid the crash. The left front of the SUV struck the crash attenuator. The SUV rotated counterclockwise, and the impact caused the front body structure to separate from the rear of the vehicle. The SUV was subsequently struck by two other vehicles, a 2010 Mazda 3 and a 2017 Audi A4, when it rotated to the right of the gore area. The photo depicts the final rest locations of the three involved vehicles. This slide depicts the damage to the three involved vehicles. The Tesla's high-voltage battery was breached in the crash, and a post-crash fire ensued. Bystanders found the driver in his seat with his lap shoulder belt buckled. They removed the driver from the vehicle before it became engulfed in flames. The driver was transported to a local hospital where he died from his traumatic injuries. The 25-year-old driver of the Mazda sustained minor injuries, and the 51-year-old driver of the Audi was uninjured. Both drivers were wearing their lap shoulder belts at the time of the crash. Fire department, law enforcement, and emergency personnel arrived at the crash location within 10 minutes of the collision. Initial fire suppression efforts were successful in extinguishing the flames. However, occasional popping noises were emitted from the Tesla. Due to concerns regarding the high voltage of the Tesla's lithium-ion battery, which was breached during the crash, the fire department requested the assistance from Tesla personnel who were located nearby. Tesla provided assistance, and the vehicle was later transported to an impound facility, and the highway was reopened for travel. The NTSB is developing a report examining electric vehicle battery fires and emergency response for these events. The lessons learned from the Mountain View crash will be incorporated into this future report. This slide shows the investigative staff. This slide shows the report development staff. This slide shows the parties to the investigation. During the investigation, staff determined that none of the following were factors in this crash: driver licensing or qualification, driver familiarization with the vehicle and the roadway, medical conditions, fatigue, or impairment by alcohol or other drugs, and weather conditions. In this crash, staff identified the following safety issue areas: driver distraction, driver mitigation pertaining to monitoring driver engagement, risk assessment pertaining to operational design domain, limitations of collision avoidance systems, insufficient federal oversight of partial driving automation systems, need for event data recording requirements for driving automation systems, and highway infrastructure issues. Note that the last safety issue listed, highway infrastructure, was addressed by the board in August of 2019 with a report and a safety recommendation. As part of the Mountain View crash investigation, staff incorporated lessons learned from 3 other Tesla crashes with Autopilot activated. The first 2 crashes, which occurred in Florida, resulted in fatal injuries to the Tesla driver. The following slides will summarize these 3 crashes and will be discussed later in Dr. Betchick's presentation. In the Williston crash, a 2015 Tesla Model S was traveling on a 4-lane divided highway. The Tesla was approaching an intersecting roadway when a truck-tractor semi-trailer was making a left turn from that roadway, crossing in front of the highway travel lanes. The Tesla struck the right side of the semi-trailer, circled in yellow here on the right photo, passed underneath it, and then went off the right side of the road. The Tesla driver died in the crash. The truck driver was not injured. The investigation of the Williston crash determined that the truck driver did not yield the right-of-way to the Tesla driver. Contributing factors in this crash were the Tesla driver's inattention to over-reliance on the autopilot system and the Tesla operational design, which permitted prolonged disengagement from driving tasks. Almost 3 years after the Williston crash, a very similar collision occurred in Delray Beach, Florida. A 2018 Tesla Model 3 was traveling on a multi-lane divided highway when it approached a truck, tractor, and semi-trailer that was attempting to cross the intersection of an adjoining driveway. The Tesla struck the left side of the semi-trailer, circled here in red on the photo at the right, and passed underneath it, shearing off the roof of the car. The Tesla driver died in the crash, and the truck driver was not injured. The investigation of Delray Beach crash determined that the truck driver did not yield the right-of-way to the Tesla driver. Contributing to the collision was the Tesla driver's over-reliance on the Autopilot system, which resulted in his failure to react to the presence of the truck. Also contributing was the operational design of the Autopilot system, which permitted disengagement by the driver, and the failure to limit the use of the system to the conditions for which it was designed. In Culver City, California, a Tesla Model S was following another car in the HOV, or carpool lane, of a multi-lane divided highway when they approached a stopped fire truck blocking the HOV lane. The lead vehicle changed lanes to avoid the fire truck, but the Tesla, operating with the Autopilot engaged, accelerated to a prior cruise control setting and struck the rear of an unoccupied fire truck at the speed of 31 miles per hour. The Tesla driver did not report any injuries. The investigation of the Culver City crash determined that the Tesla driver's inattention and over-reliance on the partial driving automation system, coupled with Autopilot design, which permitted the driver to disengage from the driving task, contributed to the crash. That concludes my presentation, and Mr. Carroll will now discuss the Autopilot and driver distraction.
Good afternoon. In this presentation, I'll describe the performance of the Tesla Autopilot system, which is a partial driving automation system. Next, I'll discuss the driver's performance and his lack of response to his SUV steering left into the gore and accelerating towards a crash attenuator. Finally, I will discuss the issue of distraction from portable electronic devices, the need for technological solutions, and the importance that employers play in combating cell phone distraction. Industry has adopted 6 levels of automation, ranging from level 0, which is no driving automation, to level 5, which is full driving automation. The Tesla Autopilot system, which provides both longitudinal and lateral control, is considered level 2 driving automation. Level 2 is considered partial automation and requires that the driver supervise the automation, maintain situational awareness of the traffic conditions, understand the limitations of the automation, and be available to intervene and take full control at all times. Dr. Betchick will discuss later in his presentation the inherent challenges drivers face in supervising automation. When Autopilot is active, the system monitors the travel path, maintains the set cruise speed, maintains the vehicle's position in the travel lane, brakes when detecting slower moving vehicles ahead, and decelerates and follows vehicles ahead at a predetermined following distance and interval. The major Autopilot features that the driver used in the moments leading up to this crash were traffic-aware cruise control, otherwise known as TAC, and auto steer. TAC maintains longitudinal control of the vehicle. It uses information from the forward-looking camera and the radar sensor to determine whether a vehicle is in front of the Tesla and in the same lane. When a lead vehicle is detected, TAC will maintain a selected time interval behind that vehicle. The auto steer lane keeping system maintains lateral control of the vehicle. It uses information from sensors to detect the lane marking and the presence of vehicles and objects. In most cases, auto steer attempts to center the Tesla in the travel lane. If auto steer does not receive adequate data from the camera or the sensors, a message will display on the instrument panel stating that auto steer is temporarily unavailable. Autopilot navigates roadways by detecting lane markings and predicting the path of travel. Auto-steer lane prediction and steering are determined by the vehicle's vision system, which consists of the cameras and the computing software. But auto-steer has limitations and can be hindered if the system cannot accurately determine lane markings, if bright light is interfering with the camera's view, if visibility is poor, or if the cameras are obstructed. The lane markings delineating the gore area were worn at the time of the crash. The red arrows in this photo point to the most prominent line, the left edge of the gore. Also, at the time of the crash, bright sunlight was shining toward the Tesla's forward-facing camera, but its impact on the vision system could not be determined. Although the exact reason cannot be determined, the initial steering movement into the gore was likely associated with limitations associated with the vision system's processing software not being able to accurately predict the appropriate lane of travel. As shown in Dr. Barth's presentation, the Tesla was more than 500 feet from the crash attenuator when it first entered the gore. When it entered the gore, there was no vehicles ahead. The driver, if looking forward, had an unobstructed view. Additional visual cues of the hazard ahead included the orange traffic cones placed in front of the damaged crash attenuator. During the final 4 seconds of travel before impact, the Tesla accelerated toward the crash attenuator, and the driver took no evasive braking or steering action to avoid a crash. This level of inaction, given the numerous visual cues and the unobstructed view, indicates the driver was inattentive to his forward view and roadway and not appropriately supervising the Autopilot partial automation system. The Tesla driver was a game developer and an avid game player who frequently used gaming applications on his cell phone. A review of cell phone records and data retrieved from his cell phone showed that a game application was active during his drive to work and at the time of the crash. Although the data could not be used to ascertain whether the driver was actually holding the phone during the final seconds before the crash, the Tesla car log data showed that there was no driver-applied steering wheel torque, which is an indicator that the hands were likely off the steering wheel during this time period. Interacting with a game application, similar to texting while driving, can be highly distracting because it involves the 3 major types of distraction: visual distraction, which is taking your eyes off the road; manual distraction, which is taking your hands off the wheel and manipulating a device; and cognitive distraction, taking your mind off the driving. In this crash, the cognitive distraction may have actually involved the driver concentrating on the game strategy. These types of distraction can significantly impair driver performance, and the risk of a crash is much higher. Efforts to combat distraction have been mostly focused on a combination of legislation, enforcement, and education. National statistics show that distracted driving from the use of portable electronic devices is not decreasing. It remains persistently high, and additional countermeasures are needed. Cell phone providers have begun offering mobile phone applications that disable texting and block non-emergency calls when a vehicle is in motion. However, the vast majority of these applications do not activate automatically and instead require voluntary activation. Furthermore, research has shown that these voluntary applications are not widely used. Cell phone manufacturers have the technological capability and hold the key to eliminating portable electronic device distraction. Distracted driving lockout mechanisms should be installed as a default setting on all phones and should automatically lock out driver distracting functions and the phone when a vehicle is in motion. Staff is proposing a safety recommendation to the major manufacturers of portable electronic devices in this area. The Tesla driver was an Apple employee and was likely distracted by the gaming application on his cell phone before the crash. The driver was using a company-issued cell phone, but his employer, Apple, did not have a policy aimed at preventing cell phone use while driving or preventing the use of the company-issued cell phone while driving. Strong company policy with strict consequences for portable electronic device while driving has been shown to be an effective strategy in helping to prevent the deadly consequences of distracted driving. Staff is proposing a recommendation be issued to Apple to implement a policy that bans the non-emergency use of portable electronic devices while driving. Although many companies in the U.S. have strong programs in place regarding distracted driving, a large majority have not implemented this safety measure. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, known as OSHA, sets and enforces standards for employees' health and safety. Duties also include training, outreach, and education to the private sector. A review of OSHA's actions regarding distracted driving indicates that more could be done to educate employers on the need to prohibit the use of cell phones while driving. Additional action is needed to increase enforcement against those employers who fail to address the hazards of distracted driving. Staff is proposing recommendations to OSHA to review and revise distracted driving initiatives and also to increase enforcement in this area. In summary, investigators found that limitations associated with the Tesla Autopilot vision system resulted in the vehicle steering into the gore area. The driver's lack of response to the steering action and the vehicle's accelerating toward the crash attenuator was likely due to cell phone distraction. Cell phone distraction is a persistent problem and additional countermeasures are needed. Technological solutions such as a distracted driving lockout mechanism and strong employer cell phone policies are effective strategies, and action is needed to deploy these countermeasures. OSHA can also do more to educate employers on distracted driving and increase enforcement as necessary. Dr. Betchik will now provide the next presentation.
Good afternoon. In this presentation, I will review 3 topics. First, I will discuss the operational design domain of Tesla's Autopilot, as well as the importance of such domain within Level 2 automated systems in general. Next, I will also examine methods of monitoring driver engagement while operating a Level 2 system across the 4 crashes that Dr. Barth has described. Finally, I will discuss the role of collision avoidance systems, CAS, and their limitations within the operational domain of Level 2 automated systems. So the first topic. Tesla's Autopilot, as well as Level 2 automation systems of other vehicle manufacturers, have operational design domain, ODD. That is, conditions in which they are designed to operate. For example, geographic location, roadway type, adequacy of roadway markings, speed range, or weather conditions. Defining an ODD is intended to be a constraint on an automated system in an effort to reduce the effect of these functional limitations. The specific autopilot limitations are found in vehicle's owner manual. The manual warns drivers not to, among other situations, use autopilot on city streets, on roads where traffic conditions are constantly changing, or on winding roads with sharp curves. In fact, the manual states that the autopilot is designed for use on divided highways with limited access. Despite all these warnings, the system allows the driver to use autopilot in conditions for which it is not designed. It is important to note that these functional limitations are not confined only to Tesla's Autopilot. They also apply to Level 2 systems of other manufacturers. The crash in Mountain View occurred on a highway with a center median divider and with limited access, the roadway type for which Autopilot is designed. However, the impact occurred at a major highway interchange with multiple exits and constantly changing traffic conditions. The traffic conditions, which according to Tesla Vehicle Owner's Manual, are not suited for Autopilot use. But such environment is challenging for Level 2 systems of other manufacturers as well. In conversation with our investigators, Tesla indicated their belief that, quote, operational design domain limits are not applicable for Level 2 driver assist systems such as Autopilot, because the driver determines the acceptable operating environment, end quote. As staff discussed earlier, this is inconsistent with the SAE definitions of automation. Dr. Barth described earlier the similar circumstances of the crashes that occurred in Williston and Delray Beach, Florida. In our investigation of the crash in Williston, the NTSB determined that the Tesla vehicle operated outside its geographic ODD at the time of the crash. The crash in Delray Beach occurred on a state highway with a center median divider, but did not have limited access. Within the 5-mile area of the crash location on this highway, there were 34 intersecting roadways. As such, particularly due to the presence of cross-traffic, the Tesla vehicle operated outside its geographic ODD at the time of the Delray Beach crash. Level 2 systems in general are largely aware of the ODD surrounding the vehicle, such as roadway type. As such, manufacturers can implement automatic safeguards to ensure that their systems are used only in conditions for which they are designed. This was our finding and a recommendation following the investigation of the Williston crash. However, Tesla's safeguards continue to do little to constrain the use of Autopilot to roadways for which the system is designed, and the consequences are evident, particularly in the Delray Beach crash. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, also has a critical role to develop a method and verify whether manufacturers are incorporating such safeguards. This was our recommendation to NHTSA following the investigation of the Williston crash, but the agency has failed to act. Staff has proposed reiterating existing recommendations to address this issue. My second topic pertains to driver engagement, specifically the monitoring. Mr. Carroll has earlier discussed Autopilot within the context of the SAE levels of automation. It is worth repeating that a driver is the primary monitor of driving environment, and as such, an integral component of Autopilot or any Level 2 system. Tesla has stated that Autopilot can be safely used even on undivided roadways, as long as the driver remains attentive. But the efficacy of driver's role is compromised by risk of automation complacency and misuse. As means of combating the expected complacency, manufacturers monitor driver engagement. Tesla monitors driver-applied changes in steering wheel torque. When the system does not detect such changes for a prolonged period, it provides a series of warnings to the driver, starting with a visual and progressing to more salient auditory warnings. The driver in the Mountain View crash had Autopilot engaged for the final almost 19 minutes. During this time, the system did not detect driver-applied torque for about a third of that time. During this period, the system issued 2 visual alerts for hands-off driving, indicated by the vertical yellow dashed lines. Because the system still did not detect steering wheel torque after the first visual warning, it progressed to the initial auditory warning, after which the driver applied torque to the steering wheel. About 6 seconds before the crash, the system stopped detecting torque to the steering wheel. This state remained until impact. The driver's pattern of use of Autopilot, including the lack of steering wheel interaction and a complete lack of response prior to the crash, indicates over-reliance on automation. The circumstances of the Mountain View crash, as they pertain to driver engagement, are very similar to the other three crashes we discussed today. In the other crashes, Tesla's autopilot system also did not detect steering wheel torque in the moments before impact, and those drivers also did not respond as they approached an obvious hazard. These drivers, as critical components of a Level 2 system, failed in their task of monitoring the environment, but humans being poor monitors of an automation system is not a surprise. Decades of research show us that. What also failed in these four crashes is Tesla's method of monitoring driver engagement. Since the driver may interact with the steering wheel without visually assessing the environment, monitoring of steering wheel torque is a poor surrogate measure of driver engagement with the driving task. Appropriate monitoring of driver engagement is a concern that we have not only with Tesla, but with other manufacturers who use steering wheel interaction as a metric for determining driver engagement. This was our finding and a recommendation following the investigation of the Williston crash. However, this issue still persists, and the consequences are evident in all four crashes that staff discussed today. Contributing to this problem is the lack of performance standards or even guidance for driver monitoring systems. While some manufacturers like Tesla monitor changes in steering wheel torque, others use other means, including a camera for tracking driver's head position. Considering that an alert and engaged driver remains critical for safety, even in vehicle with Level 2 and multiple advanced driver assistance systems, an effective driver monitoring system should be required, not only to address automation complacency, but also distraction. Staff has proposed new and reiteration of existing recommendations that reflect these areas of improvement. Lastly, my third topic discusses forward collision avoidance systems. Dr. Barth has earlier discussed CAS within the context of the Mountain View crash. Forward CAS, specifically collision warning and automatic emergency braking, AEB, are designed to prevent or mitigate the severity of rear-end crashes. These systems are not required equipment on vehicles, although NHTSA has developed testing protocols for them as part of New Car Assessment Program, NCAP. These protocols include various rear-end crash scenarios and are conducted at the maximum speed of 45 miles per hour. Furthermore, the testing includes only vehicle profile targets. It does not include roadway objects such as barriers or crash attenuators. So forward CAS from Tesla or any other manufacturer are not required to have such capability. Forward collision warning and AEB are standard equipment on Tesla vehicles, and these systems have met NHTSA's testing criteria. However, the circumstances of the Mountain View crash were beyond NHTSA's testing parameters. The Tesla vehicle was traveling about 65 miles per hour as it was accelerating towards the end of the gore, well above NHTSA's maximum testing speed. And the encountering hazard was a crash attenuator, an object that the system was not designed to detect nor is tested for. As such, Tesla's CAS did not detect the attenuator, and forward collision warning and AEB did not activate. In two of the other crashes we discussed today, Williston and Delray Beach, the high speed was also a factor. Furthermore, the encountering hazard, a cross-traffic vehicle, is not a hazard that the system was designed to detect, nor is tested for. As a result, the forward collision warning and AEB did not activate. In the Culver City crash, the Tesla vehicle was traveling at a much lower speed, about 30 miles per hour. But as the lead vehicle changed lane, the Tesla approached a type of vehicle which is not accounted for in testing protocols. And although the Tesla's forward collision warning activated, It was too close to impact for the driver to react. While the capabilities of forward casts continually increase, these 4 crashes provide good examples of their current limitations. But the advancement of these systems can be accelerated through broader and more demanding testing protocols incorporated into NCAP. Specifically, NHTSA's testing protocols should include highway speed scenarios and detection of roadside hardware, as well as the expanded range of vehicle profiles. A high testing ceiling will provide manufacturers with an incentive, but also maintain the capabilities within the ODD of partially automated vehicle systems. Staff has proposed new recommendations and reiteration of an existing one that reflect these areas of improvement. In summary, while providing valuable assistance to drivers, partially automated vehicle systems also have important limitations. Due to these functional limitations, it is important to restrict their use to domains for which they are designed. And because we humans are poor monitors of automated systems, effective method of monitoring driver engagement is crucial. Forward collision warning and AEB have proven benefits, but also have limitations, particularly in highway environment. More demanding testing protocols of these systems would provide manufacturers with incentives to enhance their effectiveness. Next, Mr. Carroll will further discuss the federal role in the oversight of partially automated vehicles.
Thank you, Dr. Betchik. In this presentation, I'll provide a brief overview of the oversight of Level 2 partial driving automation systems provided by the Department of Transportation and by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. I will then discuss NHTSA's enforcement authority as it relates to identifying safety-related defects of automated vehicle safety technologies. DOT and NHTSA have taken a non-regulatory, hands-off approach to automated vehicle safety. DOT policy guidelines makes it clear that the focus of efforts should be on removing unnecessary barriers to innovation and issuing voluntary guidance rather than regulations. While DOT has issued some policy guidance for higher levels of automation, levels 3 to level 5, little to no guidance or standards exist for partial driving automation systems currently on our highways today. In conversations with NHTSA, they have informed us that it plans to ensure the safety of level 2 partial driving automation systems through its enforcement authority based upon a surveillance program that identifies safety-related defect trends in design or performance. For this approach to be successful, it will require a robust surveillance and defect investigation program. NHTSA's enforcement policy states that when an automated vehicle technology causes injuries or poses safety risk, the agency will evaluate such technology to ensure it does not present an unreasonable risk to safety. The enforcement policy states that manufacturers must account for foreseeable misuse that may occur. Examples of misuse should include drivers disengaging from the driving task, taking their hands off the steering wheel, operating the system outside the operational design domain, to name just a few. NHTSA policy also states that partial driving automation system that allows a driver to relinquish control of the vehicle but does not account for reasonably foreseeable situations where a distracted or inattentive driver must retake control may constitute an unreasonable risk to safety. According to the enforcement guidance, NHTSA must complete a forward-looking risk analysis that not only protects individuals from risks that have already occurred, but to prevent serious injuries before they occur. As part of our investigation, staff reviewed what actions have been taken by the NHTSA's Office of Defect Investigation regarding Tesla Autopilot system. Following the Williston, Florida crash, NHTSA opened a preliminary evaluation of Autopilot. The evaluation did not identify any defects, but reserved the right to take further action if circumstances warranted. Our review of the NHTSA ODI evaluation of Autopilot identified some shortfalls and found that the agency did not thoroughly evaluate the effectiveness of the driver monitoring system in ensuring driver engagement, the foreseeability of future misuse of the system, the risk of future use of the system outside its operational design domain, and the risk associated with the Autopilot system's limitations. Because DOT and NHTSA have placed full reliance on the defect investigation program to ensure the safety of Level 2 partial driving automation, and in view of our recent crash investigations, staff believes that further action is warranted and is proposing recommendations to NHTSA to further evaluate Tesla Autopilot-equipped vehicles. In summary, the DOT and NHTSA non-regulatory hands-off approach to oversight of Level 2 driving automation systems requires a strong defect investigation program. Staff review of NHTSA's ODI investigation of Autopilot-equipped vehicles identified shortfalls. Further evaluation of the Tesla Autopilot system is needed to ensure the system does not pose an unreasonable risk to safety. Mr. Squire will now provide the final presentation on the importance of event data recorders.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My presentation will focus on the need to improve the capabilities of crash event data recorders to include additional data from vehicles with advanced driver assistance systems. As illustrated in the previous presentations, many of the circumstances and events surrounding this crash that involved vehicle and driver performance were identified through electronic data primarily recorded by two means: a continuous logging system referred to by the manufacturer's car log data, and crash event data generically identified as EDR data. Lastly, I'll summarize three past recommendations issued by the Safety Board in this area. The car log data in this case represents a continuous recording effectively covering hundreds of parameters as determined by the vehicle manufacturer. This parametric data may be recorded at specific time intervals or when a change in status occurs. This data conveys not only the status of vehicle systems, but also driver inputs and commands. It is this data that enables investigators to determine what automated systems were engaged by the driver, when those systems were activated, and what operational conditions or constraints were set by the driver. While the data may be stored locally on board the vehicle and/or periodically transmitted wirelessly to servers maintained by the manufacturer, it is stored in a proprietary format that requires extraction and interpretation by the manufacturer for use by investigators. The EDR data is recorded as a function within the vehicle airbag or restraint control module and represents crash-related data. Unlike the continuous recording of car log data, recording or writing of crash event-related data begins with a crash or another trigger event. Motor vehicle EDRs are not required by regulation. While EDRs are not required, 49 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 563, does define the requirements for an EDR if one is installed by a vehicle manufacturer. This regulation pertains only to light vehicles manufactured after September 1st of 2012. Part 563 also specifies data format, minimal survivability of data, and requires that the data be retrievable and interpretable through commercially available means. If a manufacturer chooses to record crash data, the regulation specifies a minimum of 15 data elements or parameters and includes the resolution and accuracy of those data. Provisions for an additional 30 parameters are also specified if those parameters are recorded. In March 2018, a commercially available means became available for the Tesla restraint control module, and this generally covers their vehicles manufactured after September 2016. Vehicle parametric data, including crash event data, are crucial to understanding and interpreting motor vehicle crashes. This data becomes a necessity when advanced driver assistance systems are in use. The typical data currently recorded and accessible from airbag control module EDRs, while invaluable for understanding the crash event, provide no information on the engagement or performance of ADAS. Additionally, where ADAS data is recorded by other vehicle systems, that data is neither readily accessible nor interpretable by crash investigators without manufacturer assistance. A standardized set of data parameters is needed to assess driver and vehicle performance, and that data needs to be readily available to crash investigators. At the conclusion of the May 2016 Williston, Florida crash investigation, the Safety Board issued several recommendations to address data collection for ADAS or automated vehicle control systems on vehicles involved in crashes. One recommendation was issued to the US DOT and two to NHTSA, and they proposed define the data parameters needed to understand the automated vehicle control systems that are adequate to characterize driver and vehicle performance before and during a crash, apply these data parameters as benchmarks for new vehicles equipped with automated control systems, and define a standard format for reporting automated vehicle control systems data. Staff proposes to reiterate and reclassify these recommendations. In summary, crash event data is crucial to understanding vehicle crashes and the factors that may contribute to them. For vehicles using advanced driver assistance or automated controls, data on these systems are needed. This data is not recorded nor required to be recorded by the typical EDR function found in most automobiles. In addition, standard data parameters for ADAS need to be defined, and that data needs to be readily accessible and interpretable by crash investigators. This concludes staff presentations, and we welcome your questions.
Thank you for the staff for a great investigation and for those presentations. We will now turn to the board member questions. Each board member will have 5 minutes per round, and we will do multiple rounds. So, and at some point during the afternoon, we will take a break. But for now, Vice Chairman Landsberg, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I believe you said that we have investigated NTSB 4 Tesla crashes that involved automation as a factor or a cause. Am I correct in that?
Yes, that is correct.
How many crashes has NHTSA investigated involving Tesla vehicles?
Although we don't have clear visibility on everything that NHTSA is doing, it's our understanding that there's 14 open investigations looking at Tesla Autopilot-equipped vehicles.
At what point does the vehicle defect assessment program start to kick in? That sounds like we've got a fairly extensive problem going here. Do you have any information on that as to when they decide that they've got a defect problem?
Well, as we stated, we're proposing recommendations that they evaluate the system to look at the issues we identified in our investigation. And we're hopeful that as part of their review of the 14 crashes that they're currently investigation, they will incorporate that into a formal investigation.
In section 16-2, it was noted that Tesla considered the auto steer feature as beta. Could you explain that a little bit more, what that means?
In general, beta means that the application or system is basically still in development stages and is still being tested and improved as bugs are identified. However, it's interesting to note, as part of our investigation, we reached out to Tesla and asked, why do you refer to this system as beta? And they basically said that they use it to encourage a higher level of vigilance because we want drivers to be clear that they must pay attention at all times and remain ready to react.
Oh, so this is sort of, you all be careful out there? You know, I understand the concept of beta testing for computer programs and phones and other things. Is this appropriate for use in safety-critical applications such as driving on a public highway?
We did not specifically address the beta testing, but we have made a number of proposed safety recommendations to hopefully address deficiencies in the Autopilot system.
Yeah, well, it seems to me that when you put a system out there that is a safety-critical system and it has known bugs in it, that it's probably pretty foreseeable that somebody's going to have a problem with it, and then they come back and say, oh, but we warned you. That doesn't seem to be a very robust safety mechanism. Can you explain why they only test the cars to 45 miles an hour? And also, what part of Jersey wall, fire truck, and tractor trailer does not form an obstacle for their vehicles to be able to detect? These seem like pretty clearly defined kinds of things that you really wouldn't want to hit at 45 or, in this case, 70.
Forward collision avoidance systems perform generally well within the limited scope of conditions, meaning rear-end crashes at speeds up to about 45 miles per hour. And the reason for that is that those are the testing protocols that NHTSA has developed, and includes 3 different types of rear-end crashes involving a single type of a vehicle profile. So while it is likely that the systems from many of the manufacturers would be capable of detecting other types of hazards, or maybe in slightly different speeds as well, they are not designed to do so, nor are they tested for. To increase the effectiveness of these systems in more challenging conditions, one way, or the best way, would be for NHTSA to expand the testing parameters and then to incentivize manufacturers to meet those criteria.
Yeah, I can now see why they are calling this system a beta-type system, and I would consider it completely inadequate. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back my time.
Vice Chairman, thank you very much. Member Hamady.
Thank you. Dr. Malloy, can you turn to finding number 19 on page 80, though? And while you're doing that, I want to once again remind people of NHTSA's mission under current law, which is, quote, to save lives, prevent injuries, reduce economic costs due to road traffic crashes through education, research, safety standards, and enforcement activity. Yet on January 7th of this year, NHTSA stated the following on Twitter. For some, affording any car, let alone a new one, can be a challenge. That's why NHTSA is working to keep regulations reasonable. So cars, trucks, and SUVs with the latest safety features are more affordable, and families can be safer on the roads. Let me be clear. NHTSA's mission isn't to sell cars. If we want to have a serious discussion about why cars are not affordable in many circumstances, we should start with wages. 1.7 million workers in the United States make the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour or less. What we should not do is lower the bar on safety. That shouldn't even be considered by an agency that has the word safety in their name. On page 42 of the accident report, we talk about the probable cause of the Delray Beach crash. And the third sentence in the probable cause reads, further contributing to the crash was the failure of NHTSA to develop a method of verifying manufacturers' incorporation of acceptable system safeguards for vehicles with level 2 automation capabilities that limit the use of automated vehicle control systems to the conditions for which they were designed, which we recommended following the Williston crash in 2016, but there was no action on that. Unfortunately, NHTSA has taken a hands-off approach on regulating AVs. NHTSA has informed us that it plans to ensure safety through its enforcement authority and surveillance program. So I read NHTSA's enforcement guidance bulletin on safety-related defects and AVs. It says, quote, NHTSA is commanded by Congress to protect the safety of the driving public against unreasonable risks of harm that may occur because of the design, construction, or performance of a motor vehicle or motor vehicle equipment, and to mitigate risks of harm, including risks that may result from automated safety technologies. So, Dr. Malloy, in your opinion, has NHTSA protected the safety of the driving public against unreasonable risks of harm that result from automated safety technologies? And what does the draft report say about NHTSA's approach to the oversight of AVs?
So, no, I believe NHTSA has not taken the approach that is best for safety in this situation. In the draft report, we say that it is a misguided approach. And the Culver City crash the Delray Beach crash that you referred to, I think for my staff and myself, there's nothing more disappointing than investigating a crash, coming up with a good solution, and having, in Tesla's case, no response, or in NHTSA's case, we don't plan to do that, and then another crash happening. So, yeah, they need to do more.
Thank you. And just to clarify, the Delray Beach report will be out when?
The Delray Beach report will be released as a companion to the Mountain View report, which about 15 days from this board meeting.
And we find in this report that NHTSA's approach is misguided because it essentially relies on waiting for problems to occur rather than addressing safety issues proactively. I'd agree. Thank you.
Member Hamady, thank you very much. Member Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the staff's work on this, being this is my first board meeting for a crash like this. And I see why it's very hearing worthy, why we have this crash on the docket here, because this is unfortunately a classic distraction crash here that included an emerging technology that maybe lacks some standards as far as the development of it and maybe some regulation. Okay. I'd like to start with your findings that you pointed out early on. Specifically, one of the first ones there, it says, none of the following were factors in the Tesla driver's actions in this crash. One being driver licensing or qualification, and two, familiarization with the vehicle and roadway. With that being said, what's required to get a license, a driver's license?
In order to get a driver's license, and in this case in California, it's required that you pass a written test. As an initial step, you have to take a driving test. And once you've accomplished that and have passed the physical requirements such as eyesight and other medical requirements, you have your driver's license.
Okay, so that's a one-time deal, maybe early on, maybe in high school?
That's the initial step. Obviously, you have to get renewals, and sometimes you need renewals of eyesights and that type of thing.
Okay. But there's no requirement, most of it, if a driving test is manipulating the controls of the vehicle, there's probably no testing on automation of the vehicle, cruise control, anything like that? Is there any of that requirement for that?
No, there's not for that. However, for different types of vehicles, if you're going to be going and driving a motorcycle, there's a different licensing requirement. For a large commercial vehicle, you have to have additional requirements to meet.
Okay. Thank you. So there was no required training for this autopilot system, auto steer, anything like that? And is there any across the board for any vehicle, the passenger vehicle like this, that has this kind of technology?
No, the only type of training that comes in is whatever the specific dealership decides to do as far as providing training on the new technology that's provided in the cars when you're purchasing a new vehicle.
Okay, so the dealership is providing training, maybe, would you say? It's not required to, and there's no requirement or regulation out there that requires somebody to receive training on this new technology or automation?
No, there's not.
Okay. Under the autopilot limitation that the vice chair had brought out earlier, it talked about beta, and you basically stated that beta is still in development. So it's still in beta means that they're still testing it. Is that correct?
That's correct, and Tesla has also advised that they plan on referring it to beta for the foreseeable future because there are constantly changes that are being made. One thing of interest that's not necessarily mentioned in the report, but one of the abilities of the car is that if you're driving down the road and, for example, the car steers into the gore, drivers have the opportunity to hit a button on their steering wheel and filing a bug report. The bug report is, you say, problem at this location, and then that information goes directly to Tesla, and Tesla tries to look for remedies for that. So again, that's part of the development stages that Tesla uses.
Okay. So they're using over the air to get that data back from the drivers to see that there might be a bug in their software?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So we're basically requiring this consumer in this case to be a test driver. And I don't believe they have received any training on how to be a test driver, like I was a test pilot and I actually received training. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. It's my understanding too that the firmware is passed over the air to update the software. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
How does a driver know that there's been an upload or an update to the software?
There's notifications that are actually made on the screen, and more recently, Tesla has also provides mobile phone notifications to drivers every time they have to basically conduct the update.
Okay. But they don't know what was updated. Is that correct?
No, for every update, there is information as to what's in the update. Whether a driver actually reads all the specifications is a different question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Member Graham, thank you very much. Member Chapman.
Well, thank you for your excellent work on this. It's much appreciated. I want to join in expressing disappointment by the lack of leadership which NHTSA has shown in the area of addressing issues related to the safe development and deployment of vehicles with driving automation systems. Because of my own experience, I naturally tend to view NHTSA's efforts in light of what I know about aviation as FAA seeks to manage the safe integration of drones into the National Airspace System. It continues to prohibit the operation of drones over people, and it does so by regulation. A typical drone weighs no more than a few pounds, yet FAA has so far maintained this limitation to help ensure safety as drone technology further develops. In contrast, highway vehicles weighing thousands of pounds and equipped with powerful yet still evolving automation are operating on our highways based at best on mere guidelines. When the technology fails or is misused in foreseeable ways, the risk to vehicle occupants and others on the road is potentially catastrophic, as we've seen in this case. As I understand, the NHTSA guidance is for SAE automation levels 3 through 5, and there is no such guidance for level 2 vehicles. Is that correct? And who decides if a given vehicle is a level 2?
That would be correct. NHTSA's AV guidance focuses almost entirely on higher level automated systems, and it is essentially a manufacturer that decides whether their vehicle is a level 2 or a different level of automation. That said, currently on the roads, only level 2 automation vehicles exist.
And given that, is there any incentive currently for a manufacturer to identify its vehicle as a level 3?
I'd rather not speak as to the incentives manufacturers might have, but there may be a potential concern about calling their vehicle level 3 as such that they would be responsible in case of a crash. But maybe more importantly, there's also lack of proper, you can call it whether a standard or guidance from NHTSA to determine as to what makes a vehicle a level 3 and at which point does the responsibility of the automated system stop and driver begin.
And again, at this point, there are no vehicles on the road that are classified or considered level 3.
None that are production level systems.
Within the report, there's an indication the driver of the Tesla may have experienced his vehicle drifting into the same highway gore area during previous drives along the same route, and you talked about the bug reporting system, which I don't think is a feature on all level 2 automobiles. I know I have an automobile with some automation, and I don't have that option that I'm aware of. Is there a means of reporting similar experiences which may be the result of some road condition anomaly more broadly? Is there a NHTSA complaint database, for example, or some other means of reporting?
Yes, every driver of a vehicle, if they have experienced an ongoing problem, there is the NHTSA complaint database, and that is what NHTSA is supposed to be using as far as their defect and surveillance program, is to look for a trend in these complaints to determine what they should evaluate and what they shouldn't.
And is it well known to most owners of level 2 vehicles how to access that database or report to that database?
I don't have information to answer that question.
I'm going to suggest not, but that's probably something we should look at. And then finally, Appendix C cites the Tesla Owner's Manual, and it details something like 50 warnings about the limitations of the Tesla Autopilot system. From the available research, what do we know about the extent to which people read owner's manuals or adhere to consumer warnings in general?
Regarding the more advanced driver assistance systems, there is recent research by maybe Consumer Reports or even AAA that shows that drivers do lack understanding of what their specific system does, its limitations, and how it works. In the 4 crashes that we investigated, the lack of knowledge really was not an issue. Maybe the issue was the adherence to the system.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're quite welcome, Member Chapman. Thank you. Dr. Malloy, before I get into the questions directly to staff, I think the public needs to know, we generally think that our report should come out in with 12 to 15 to 18 months. Next month will mark the 2-year anniversary for this one. So I know you've had a lot in the last 2 years, have been very busy for the Office of Highway Safety. So how has this impacted the ability to bring this one to the board? Talk about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. About the time we took on the Mountain View investigation, in that same week, actually just prior to the Mountain View investigation, we launched on the bridge collapse investigation in Florida, and we also launched on the Tempe pedestrian crash involving the Uber. So that creates some complexities as far as I'm running them more or less on the same schedule. So we've had board meetings in October, November, and now February, back to back, and that's a limitation of how many my staff can do at a time. In addition, as we were concerned about how widespread some of these issues are with regard to the Autopilot or level 2 systems, we had opportunity to pick up a case in Delray Beach, Florida, that we've talked about today. That's actually less than a year old, but we needed to finish our investigation of that and incorporate it. So those are some of the reasons.
Yeah, you've got a lot going on, and to be very clear, you do very good work. I mean, as you pointed out, March 15th, pedestrian bridge collapse. A few days later, 3 days later, Tempe, and 5 days after Tempe was this crash. So just right there in 8 days. Plus, you've got a limousine crash that you're dealing with 20 fatalities. So Office of Highway Safety has a lot going on. I just think it's important that the public understand that we're not just sitting around doing nothing. I do want to talk about cell phones. There are a number of areas that I will explore in my line of questioning. There's been a lot of research that cell phones, PEDs, smartphones can be potentially even addictive. I know that I sure wouldn't want to do without mine. I'm probably somewhat addicted to it. There's an article in the current issue of Addictive Behaviors, the February issue, that further explores how addictive these devices can be. People want that dopamine fix of knowing that somebody responded to a text message or posted something on a social media site. So I think Apple and the other smartphone developers, in this case I want to talk specifically about Apple, but Apple has created something that people are, in some cases, literally addicted to. In fact, Apple is the biggest manufacturer of smartphones in the US. So, given that, I'd say that Apple has yet to recognize their own responsibility as an employer, that they have failed to say of our over 135,000 employees that we care about you and we don't want you to go out and kill yourself or others on the roadway. Apple has failed in that respect. And Mr. Carroll, I thought I would ask you about this, but in the interest of time, I won't. But in the docket, there's an email to you from the Network of Employees for Traffic Safety, and they do point out in that email that banning cell phones use resulted in measurably fewer crashes and a lower percentage of vehicles involved in those crashes. So it is very important for organizations to adopt strict PED devices, and Apple has fallen down in that role. We've seen several crashes where people have been on phones or in some form or fashion. I won't even try to enumerate them right now, but I will say that we've seen at least 5 crashes where people have been operating level 2 automation and they've been fiddling with a cell phone or something. We couldn't quite figure out a few of them actually, but Tempe was our last board meeting where a driver of not a Tesla, but an Uber ATG, they're automated technologically, whatever the ATG stands for, group. You know, that driver was doing a movie. We found that NHTSA found in a 2019 study that nearly 10% of drivers are using PEDs at any one given moment. So this is a problem. It requires a lot of work, and we've got a long way to go. Vice Chairman, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to follow up a little bit on that line of questioning. Do humans multitask well?
Maybe without going into specifics of attention and task switching, a good rule of thumb would be that when we perform 2 or more tasks at the same time, our performance for each one of them is worse than performing them individually. So there is a cost. For example, when talking on a cell phone while driving, we may be able to maintain the position within a lane and a constant speed relatively well, but may miss an exit we intended to take or be too slow to respond to a vehicle ahead.
So is there science do we have science to back this up that says that, this multitasking thing that people say, they used to put it on resumes, and hopefully they're learning that that's probably not a good thing to do now, but do we have scientific basis for this?
Yeah, there is a lot of research. Multitasking on a resume is a different thing than compared to dual task research in visual science.
So I think in the Tempe crash, you coined a term of automation complacency. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I can't take credit for the term, but automation complacency in driving tasks outside controlling of the vehicle includes sustained attention to the environment. And when we automate vehicle controls, it becomes more challenging to continually monitor that environment, especially if the automated system performs pretty well and we learn to trust it. At that point, we might be more likely to start mind-wandering, so inattentional complacency, or to purposefully engage in a distracting task, such as checking our phone. So automation complacency in a driving is an expected risk, and not only in driving, that is found in other modes of transportation as well as other areas.
So it would be fair to say that this is a foreseen problem with level 2 vehicles?
Correct.
Okay. How effective is auto steering in lane keeping? Specifically in the Tesla in this case. I mean,
Well-
and I don't intend this to be a rhetorical question, but in this case, obviously it didn't work. But
Well, overall, AutoSteer does a very good job in lane keeping and centering most of the time. And that is where the problem rises. It ties in with Dr. Betchick's with automation complacency and so forth. And because you kind of foster a false sense of security that the system's going to work, and it results in an over-reliance on a system that shouldn't be over-relied upon.
so it kind of sounds like we've got one foot on the dock and one on the boat here in this automation business, which you know what that leads to. Does the quality of the paint marking make any difference?
Yes, it does.
And when the system senses that it's losing it, is there some way for it to inform the driver that, hey, you got it, I'm out of here?
Yes, if there's not enough data from the camera or the sensors, it does allow you sometimes to receive an alert about the auto steer being temporarily unavailable. After this crash, in an update to the firmware that Tesla supplied, they added an alert with circumstances that if they detect that the hands are not on the steering wheel and it loses lane line acquisition, that it'll provide more of an immediate alert. So they tried to come out with a fix that would fix this specific crash.
Interesting. Okay, I'll defer till the next round. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chairman Landsberg, thank you very much. Member Homendy.
Thank you. Just picking up on the auto steer issue, the driver of this vehicle was part of a Tesla Model X Facebook group, which I joined just to see what was being discussed in the group. I'm probably now being removed from the group, but I wanted to see what the discussion was on Autopilot and auto steer, and there seemed to be some issues with Autopilot and auto steer, with unfortunately people taking videos of their vehicle leaving the road and them having to come back. So my first question is, Dr. Malloy, do you think people understand the technology and the limitations of the technology?
So I think people understand conceptually what the technology does. I think on the limitations of the technology, that's something they don't fully understand. And those limitations how they will impact the safety, they don't fully understand.
Yeah, and that seems to be clear from a lot of the discussion in the group. There were a lot of questions, and a lot of people didn't really know that there were areas they were operating that they shouldn't be. So I do think there's some educational issues, and Member Graham had asked about, do you get notifications when your vehicle is updated? I wonder how many people actually read that. I know when I update my phone, which is very different from a vehicle, I don't read what the updates were on my phone. So I wonder how that translates when you're looking at a vehicle as well, or dealing with a vehicle as well. I think after this board meeting, there'll be some people who say, we're just picking on Tesla. And this was obvious. This was somebody who was distracted. They were gaming. The person experienced a similar situation with the vehicle moving towards the Gore area twice before, and California should have fixed their attenuator. So I guess I'd ask you, Dr. Malloy, to respond to the first, are we just picking on Tesla? And second, why do we look at other issues beyond just what happened?
So the reality is our interest in automated vehicles on the highway began in 2014 as we were being briefed by Google, now Waymo, about their systems. And, you know, I think of a crash that happened in 72 where the board found that the operator's over-reliance on the system can be manifested in such a way as they grow more confident in it, it can be more over-reliant, and then they'll be willing to do other things. So this is something we've known for a long time with automation. So we started there. It just so happens that the crashes we've investigated, 4 of them have been Tesla, 1 has been Navio, 1 has been Uber. And in each of those investigations, we're finding some of the automation issues that we've seen in other modes here. So the recommendations we made, basically one of them, a couple of them are to Tesla because they've got a specific problem they need to fix. But the reality is that recommendations to NHTSA and to the other auto manufacturers are to show that this is not a unique problem to Tesla. This is a problem related to automation and how people work with automation.
Great. Tesla did make some changes to the vision system processing software after this crash. Would that have prevented would those changes have prevented the Mountain View crash? And in other words, can the new software accurately and consistently detect unusual or worn lane markings? And second, did Tesla and NHTSA implement our safety recommendations, and what is the status of those?
From our understanding in discussing the updates that Tesla has made regarding their vehicles, they have added some features. So for example, if it loses line acquisition or predictability, be able to predict the lane, and your hands are off, it will give the driver a warning. That hopefully will help. And they've improved some of their detection ability with Gore areas. So those are good things, but as we've talked about before, fixing problems after people die is not a really good highway approach. Mm-hmm. And then also, with regard to both Tesla and NHTSA, we've received no response from Tesla regarding their operational design domain recommendation to limit the use of their vehicles to that. And then we received a response from NHTSA that they don't intend to take action on our recommendation.
Thank you. And just one last point. In this report, we are considering redesignating those as open, unacceptable action for both Tesla and NHTSA.
So in the report for the NHTSA recommendation, it is currently, the recommendation status is unacceptable.
Okay.
We're changing the status towards the data recorder recommendations, that to an unacceptable, but for those other 2, they were already unacceptable.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Hamady. Member Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to make a comment about my last line of questioning about the training or lack of and qualifications for vehicles. Driving is the most popular form of transportation in the United States, and it's also the mode that kills the most by far than any of the other modes of transportation. And yet it's kind of ironic that it's also become acceptable that those of us that get behind the wheel are probably least trained when compared to all the other modes and vehicles that we operate in the other modes, that we're the least trained to that. So I'm going to switch here a little bit and talk a little bit about the lane markings and everything like that, since the Vice Chairman had brought it up. And I want to talk about the gore area. What is a gore area?
The gore area is, in this case, a triangular-shaped area. Usually is the dividing section between a main line of a freeway compared to the exit lane of the freeway. It's a separating area.
Okay. And how is a gore area typically demarcated?
It's typically demarcated with, well, I can speak for California. It's generally an 8-inch wide white reflective line to separate it from the other lane lines, which are generally 4 to 6 inches wide.
Okay. So there's no standard across the U.S. for a gore area then, for marking?
Yes, there is standards. It's in the manual for uniform traffic control devices as to what is required for lane lines at all locations, including a gore, as far as the minimum specifications.
Okay, so what the markings are strictly visual markings then, is that correct?
They're visual markings. There's also, out of a previous crash that we investigated in San Jose, under very similar circumstances to this, where a Greyhound bus impacted a crash attenuator, we recommended that all gores at left exits have supplemental cross-hatching or chevrons be implemented in those locations.
Still, that would be just a visual indication, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. With that, all the lane markings and everything out there, I assume, have been designed over the years for the human eye. Would that be a correct statement?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the auto steer function of this Tesla and, say, other vehicles that have a similar technology, are they using pretty much a visual system to keep within the lane?
It really depends on what manufacturer you're talking about, but generally with auto steer and the Autopilot system, it relies primarily on the vision system to predict the path to travel.
Okay, so the technology has been designed basically along the lines of the human eye, is what we're looking at here.
Well, there's other manufacturers that have built in additional redundancy, such as having the area be fully mapped with GPS mapping so that you have mapping of the area so that if you're out of the lane, it will tell you that. Some manufacturers use LiDAR to actually map the area so they have more high definition information as to the area it's passing through.
Okay, thank you. So not everything's visual as far as the technology is going, so maybe our road designs and markings maybe need to be looked at and new standards set for them. It's kind of, I know I had a discussion with staff in our pre-meeting, and everything about that area was a visual indication that you were outside the line of traffic and that there was actually fading on the striping or the line itself that that probably caused the vehicle to steer into the gore area. It's kind of unfortunate that maybe we don't think outside the box here a little bit and maybe recommend some grooved rumble strips or something like that to get the attention of a driver who's not paying attention and maybe that distraction might have helped in this case or in other cases, but I think it's something worth looking towards in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Member Graham. Member Chapman.
With regard to driver distraction, one of our colleagues here at NTSB recently showed me how to activate the Do Not Disturb While Driving function on my mobile phone. I don't think my teenage son would describe me as tech savvy, but I do think of myself as relatively proficient with technology, and I was frankly unaware that I had such an option on my phone. And that, of course, is the point. It makes more sense to turn on such a feature as the default setting to better ensure that users are aware that such an option exists. And taking that approach, using it as the default setting, would require that users make a special effort if they choose to turn the function off, rather than requiring them to make a special effort to turn the function on. Have we spoken to any of the cell phone manufacturers specifically about the idea of locking users out while driving? And are they amenable to this approach?
Staff has reached out and had some discussions with Apple prior to this meeting, and the primary discussion was related to the innovations that Apple has initiated, such as the Do Not Disturb While Driving and their CarPlay system, in-vehicle system. We did address issues such as the need to automatically lock it out. We also are concerned that this voluntary application that's available in a study done by Insurance Institute of Highway Safety found that only 1 out of 5 people have it set on automatic to automatically lock it out. So, that is why staff is proposing a recommendation for an automatic lockout mechanism be installed on all portable electronic devices as a default setting.
Appropriately, the draft proposes that NHTSA and SAE International should work cooperatively to develop performance standards for driving monitoring systems to help minimize driver disengagement, prevent auto complacency, and account for foreseeable misuse of the automation. Do we have evidence that there are systems that are more effective than steering wheel torque? And specifically, what do we know about how well eye tracking systems work?
As to the evidence, because there are no standards or guidance, we cannot say that there are, and there are too few of vehicles with different types of a system to make an inference based on crashes, something that IHS might do. That said, most vehicle manufacturers use some type of steering wheel interaction as a metric to infer driver engagement. After the Williston crash investigation, and again today, we stated that we do not believe that steering wheel torque monitoring is an effective metric for inferring driver engagement, and for that reason, we cannot say that a hands-off period of 0 seconds is good enough, simply because hands on the steering wheel may not necessarily indicate that the driver is attentive. Most vehicle manufacturers, as I said, use some type of a steering wheel interaction for engagement. One of them uses a camera that tracks head position movements. As far as I know, the systems that might be used in production vehicles that are affordable track only head position rather than gaze.
One last question. I want to circle back to the discussion of road markings. We know that state transportation departments often struggle with funding to keep roads safe and maintained. To what extent can we expect roads to be designed to accommodate automated driving system technology? And is it realistic to think that state DOTs will be in a position to respond?
As part of this investigation, we saw that this crash may be an opportunity for recommendations in this area to look at this. But during the course of our investigation, we found that the Federal Highway Administration has already begun a national dialogue on automation and what the future holds for what type of roadway markings need to be displayed, what signage needs to be implemented, even whether you need to have traffic control at intersections. So because of the action that's being taken in there, we've basically proposed a finding in this area, and obviously are going to be trying to monitor what's proceeding in this area, because we do believe that the infrastructure plays a critical role in the performance of the automation.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
You're quite welcome, Member Chapman. Thank you. So I want to follow up on something that Member Chapman said. In 2011, and I suspect Ms. Perot was probably coming out of the Gray Summit, Missouri crash, where we did issue recommendation H11-47 to what was then the Consumer Electronic Association to encourage the development of technology features that disable the functions of portable electronic devices. So that was already out there, and I think we're proposing to close that one out because apparently we never received a reply from them. So we are going to close that no longer applicable, and then create a new recommendation directly to the cell phone manufacturers, I believe. But once again, here's a recommendation where somebody, some organization, some entity decided they didn't even need to write us a letter. Is that basically correct, Ms. Perot?
I'd say there's a slight difference. Sorry. They did actually respond to us. They didn't inform their members of the issues that we outlined in the recommendation as the other recipient did, CTIA. They talked about some other things in their letter to us, which were not appropriate, and that's why it stayed open await response, because we didn't actually get a response that was tangent. The response was tangent to the recommendation.
Thank you. But the bottom line is, yes, we have weighed in on that, and yes, we are going to pursue it in this board meeting. We will entertain a recommendation to further get that point out directly to the cell phone manufacturers. Mr. Banyard, if you could pull up slide 27, and while we're pulling that up, I'm curious about the role, on slide 27, it appears that the lane marking, the right-hand marking of the gore, the one that does not have the red arrows on it, it looks like that's very faded. And is it because of that ill-painted or mostly faded line that the camera system of this Tesla SUV thought there was no line there and then started hugging what is the left line, the one with the arrows?
Chairman, we looked at a number of factors because we really wanted to answer that question, why the vision system steered it into the gore. And while we think that that was potentially part of the issue, we also looked at the fact of the bright light. We looked at the firmware that was in place. In this case, there was a lead vehicle that was 80 feet ahead, potentially an obstructing vehicle to lane lines. So the one thing we do know is the vision system, the cameras in conjunction with the computing software is what makes the prediction of where it goes. And we know because of the limitations in the system, that's what caused it to make a left steering motion. One other item that we looked at is we removed the Autopilot computer system from the Tesla, and myself and a recorder specialist from research and engineering went to Tesla with their engineers to try to extract video imagery and so forth from it, but because of the catastrophic nature of this crash, we weren't able to get that. But if we were able to get information from that, they may have told us more as to why the vision system did what it did.
So we can't say for certain why it veered into the gore. I'm putting my money on the faded lane lines, but we know it was a persistent problem in this particular area. I think it was Member Chapman that said that this driver had reported a number of issues in this particular area. It's not written this way in the draft report, but it is in the docket that in interviews with his family and friends, that about 7 out of 10 times when he was traveling in the vicinity of this particular gore, his car would take a dive towards the barrier. In fact, on just a few days prior to the crash, to this fatal crash, on Monday, March the 19th, just 4 days before this fatal crash, he stated in a text message to a friend of his that morning the Autopilot almost led him to hit the median at the I-85 separation. So it was numerous occasions that this vehicle of his would attempt to head at that location towards the barrier. And you would think that with the knowledge that this is something that my car is going to act pretty squirrely on, that maybe at least if I'm playing a game through the rest of my ride, maybe I should at least be more vigilant at this particular location. This kind of points out two things to me. The semi-autonomous vehicles can lead drivers to be complacent, highly complacent about their systems, and it also points out that smartphones, manipulating them can be so addictive that people aren't going to put them down. So we've been in here for 2 hours. We're going to take a 15-minute break. We will come back, let's say at 3:10. We are in recess. Okay, we'll begin back in 60 seconds. We're back in session, and for the next round, Vice Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Despite all the limitations that Tesla placed on the use of the Autopilot, as I understand it, there was no firmware or software or anything to prohibit its use in what we'll call inappropriate places. Am I correct? And is it fair?
Correct.
Yeah, is that correct? Okay. Is it fair to assume that driver misuse of these systems is not only possible, but it's likely?
It certainly should be expected. And the adherence to limitations and warnings which appear in vehicle owner's manual rely on first on a driver to know about them, second to understand them, and then to adhere to those.
And I think we've already ascertained that most drivers are not familiar particularly with their systems.
Well, at least with the 4 crashes that we discussed today, we believe that those drivers were familiar with the system and their limitations, but
Chose to
in
ignore.
most cases were not adhering to various warnings.
Okay. I know we've got a recommendation pending here for to the manufacturers of the personal electronic devices, and I'm going to use this as an opportunity to push something that's on our most wanted list and has been for a number of years, and that is the whole business of distraction. And it cuts across all modes, but particularly on the highways, we have what is literally an epidemic. The last year that we have data for, we could definitely tie somewhere around 4,000 fatalities and tens of thousands of life-altering injuries because people were distracted by their personal electronic devices. This is a rhetorical question, but I'll ask you anyway. Do you know how many PEDs are out there in the United States?
I believe it's more than there are citizens of the United States.
That is correct. We have something in the neighborhood of 4 billion with a B, and many people carry more than one, and too many of them are using them while they're driving. And what this crash illustrates is not only do we have the old kind of distraction of the PEDs, but now with the level 2 automation, we've introduced yet another kind, which is the automation complacency of the system almost kind of always works, except when it doesn't. And then people get into yet even more difficulty. So I hope as a result of this crash and some of the others that we're going forward, that we can get the community to start to understand, and the regulatory agencies, that this is, in the aviation world, many of us up here come from aviation, we wouldn't tolerate 1/100th of the fatality rate that we do on the highways, and people seem to think that their freedom of using their PED is fine and that they aren't going to have a crash. And unfortunately, this situation proves that that's correct. I'll get off my soapbox now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Landsberg. Member Hamady.
I want to talk a little bit about monitoring driver engagement for a second. So the Tesla's Autopilot assesses the driver's level engagement by monitoring driver distraction with the steering wheel through changes in steering wheel torque, and we've determined that's not effective. Are there occasions when Autopilot will not register torque, and in what circumstances? Steering wheel torque.
There is a certain amount of torque required for the system to detect it. So there may be circumstances where a driver has hands on the steering wheel, but the system does not detect the torque, sufficient torque.
And we know that wasn't the case here because we know that there was a gaming application or some sort of gaming going on. Correct?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. How do other modes of, I'm just curious, how do other modes of transportation monitor operator engagement?
So in many of the modes, obviously, the board's investigated crashes that have involved marine, aviation, and rail. In each of the modes, they have multiple operators performing the task. So they have each other to follow. In some cases, obviously, in rail, they'll have some devices to keep, you have to keep your dead man switch kind of thing to show you're attentive. But a lot of it, you've got that second person in there to help you if you miss something to detect it.
Yeah, in rail, they have the alerter, and they
Yeah.
also, some rail operators have cameras in the cab, which looks at things later. So there are some, but it'd be interesting to look at cross-modally how different operators monitor engagement in other modes of transportation. I just put that out there. Dr. Betchick, on collision avoidance, NHTSA has established performance standards for forward collision warning and automatic emergency braking. Collision avoidance systems that meet those standards are listed as recommended safety technologies on the NHTSA website. What's evaluated in NHTSA's new car assessment program's 5-star safety ratings program? What's missing, and how does the program compare to Euro NCAP?
The 5 stars in the NCAP refer only to vehicle crash worthiness and rollover protection. The 5-star rating does not include a rating of various collision avoidance systems. NHTSA in December of 2015 has published an NPRM that proposes expanding NCAP to include ratings for various collision avoidance systems, as well as for pedestrian detection, pedestrian safety. This is following our recommendation to NHTSA to do exactly that, and following the mandate from the Congress to NHTSA to have such rulemaking within a year. It has been 5 years since then, and for whatever reason, NHTSA has not yet done so. In comparison, Euro NCAP, the ratings, the final safety rating requires certain level of crash worthiness performance, certain level of collision avoidance systems, as well as pedestrian detection. Furthermore, the testing for collision avoidance systems in Euro NCAP, besides the rear-end crash, also includes different profile targets such as pedestrian and a bicyclist.
Thank you. Dr. Barth, and I assume you can answer this. Do they look in crash testing at damage to batteries, like lithium-ion batteries?
Yes, there's a Federal Motor Vehicle Standard 305, which is focused on lithium-ion vehicle batteries. But what it does is it refers, for the crash testing, it refers to the other FMVSSs where they delineate the specific crash testing, and then they've added some responses to look for example, when they do some post-crash inspection of the vehicle, they look for things like battery leakage or damage to the battery.
And in fact, there was a crash test where there was some damage to the battery that we are aware of, correct?
That's correct. In 2011, a Chevy Volt incident where it had finished an NCAP side impact test suffered some damage to the battery case, which manifested in a reignition or fire of the vehicle 3 weeks later as it sat waiting to be auctioned off. And NHTSA initiated an investigation to determine the issues with the battery in that case.
And in this, I think it would be helpful, and I know that we're going to have a separate report on electric vehicle batteries, which is expected to come out sometime this summer, which is why we did not include recommendations in this report. But it would be helpful, because we didn't discuss it earlier on, to talk about what happened in the fire in this case.
Yeah, so we have, you're right, we have a finding here that there was unusual fire and electrical hazards that were discovered in this crash. It was one of the reasons that we responded to it. The battery case was breached in this crash, and the first responders were, and that did lead to some reignition events after the initial fire extinguishing was conducted. The fire responders reacted and were able to put out the fire, but they were also aware that electric vehicles can present unique challenges, which is part of the reason that they decided to delay opening of the freeway and bring in the Tesla engineers to get some assistance. And so the vehicle was able to be moved from the scene without incident, and we were incorporating the lessons learned from this crash with the report we're developing in the summer that combined this crash with some other investigations with similar situations.
Okay, I'm going to follow up on this in my next round.
Thank you, Member Homedy. Member Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Member Homedy bringing up the NHTSA's new car assessment program, the 5-star rating program. As a matter of fact, my staff, we printed off one of those reports today, looking at one of my staff members' cars, and I will tell you, it's quite honestly pretty worthless. I get some stars for frontal crash, side crash, and some rollover information. Doesn't really tell me a whole lot about it, whether it was good or bad. And then in the recommended safety technologies, it comes up and it shows what options are available on the vehicle. In this case, forward collision warning, lane departure warning, crash imminent braking. We clicked on that to see what was there. Nothing. Nothing was there. So the report is pretty worthless. Didn't really tell me much as a consumer. We went ahead and printed off the big technical report, or we were planning on it, but it was like 100 and some pages, and it was nothing really useful for the consumer, I would say. A lot of engineering terminology and everything. So so we're aware that it just shows vehicle crash worthiness and rollover safety. What does the Euro and NCAP include besides those?
As I just stated, the overall safety rating, Euro NCAP, includes crash worthiness, various collision avoidance technologies, and pedestrian detection. And generally each year, in order to achieve the maximum rating, a manufacturer has to do better than the previous year. With that said, here in the US, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety also has a safety rating that includes crash worthiness as well as collision avoidance systems, and IHS also rates performance of various vehicle manufacturers and how well their AEB, for example, performs, whether it's acceptable, excellent, or poor. I can't remember the exact naming.
Okay. I'm glad you talked about that, because we just happened to print my staff member's vehicle out of the Euro NCAP. And I will tell you, if I was going to make a recommendation to NHTSA, and I'm big into not reinventing the wheel, I'd have them go out and look at their site and do what they did as far as the presentation. The pictures are very upfront. There's a very easy to read legend that's in colors that basically says good, adequate, marginal, weak, poor. It's got a rating system in there. Great pictures and things like that I'd highly recommend. And a matter of fact, when I go home tonight, I'm going to print, hopefully they have my cars in here. I'm going to print it off and look at that. So I think NHTSA's got a high bar to reach here, but I don't think it's that hard to reach. Very simple, very informative pictures and diagrams. So one more question with my time. What obstacles does this Tesla vehicle forward collision avoidance system, what objects can it see?
Again, it might be a question for Tesla to state what kind of objects that they are designing their systems for, whether it may see some of them, but the actual tests that those systems are tested for are based on NHTSA's testing protocols, which, as we stated earlier, test up to 45 miles per hour and only one type of a target, which is back of a regular passenger vehicle, I believe. So and this is true not only for Tesla, but for collision avoidance systems of all other manufacturers, while they may be able in certain circumstances to perform more than that, they are simply not tested to those standards.
Okay, thank you. And it just happens to be that Euro NCAP report for this vehicle actually went over each one of those types of obstacles, whether it was a pedestrian coming straight on, cross traffic, same with the bicycle, other vehicles, barriers, things like that. It all had all of that in the rating system, and it's quite a good presentation, and I'd highly recommend that for everybody. Thank you.
If you just allow me to add, NHTSA has in the previous NPRMs proposed various testing protocols for pedestrian detection that really mimic most of what Euro NCAP does, but it's just much of that work that NHTSA has done is sort of, I don't know, somewhere in the limbo, and the expansion of NCAP just has not happened yet.
Very unfortunate for us here. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Graham. Member Chapman.
I just have one question related to the battery issues, and I recognize you're still doing work on this, and I want to be fair to Tesla because I understand obviously that the circumstances were unique because of their proximity to the location of this accident, but I was struck, apparently emergency response personnel were told by a Tesla battery engineer that the vehicle was not safe and that individuals should stay away from the SUV until Tesla representatives could evaluate it. Again, recognizing that they were in relatively close proximity, but is that the company's plan for responding to battery fires? And if so, is that sustainable? And how is that, how do they intend to respond where they aren't in close proximity to an accident of this nature?
So the Tesla publishes emergency response guides for vehicles involved in collisions, and they do not plan on, they don't have a standard protocol for providing assistance in a crash. They recommend that you use the guidance that they have. The firefighters in this case called up Tesla because there is a vehicle after it crashes. There's usually stranded energy in that battery. Their energy still exists on scene, and so there's a potential for a high voltage risk or a fire risk. And so they called the Tesla, they just called up Tesla directly, and out of an abundance of caution, the Tesla representative said, there could be stranded energy, and you should avoid the vehicle until you know what the risks are. I think they likely parroted the response guides, and they have some guidance on how to safely remove the vehicle from the scene.
And are those response guides relatively accessible? If I'm a responder in a small town in the Midwest somewhere and have to respond to an accident like this, would I know where to find that information, and would it be accessible to me?
The response guides are published both, Tesla has them on their website. The National Fire Protection Association has a web page with hyperlinks for pretty much all electric vehicle manufacturers where you can access the emergency response guide for most electric vehicles that are available. And many fire departments have like iPad-style applications that they can also access these guides. And so there are multiple outlets to acquire their response guides from the various manufacturers.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Member Chapman, thank you. Let me clarify something earlier. What is the NTSB's position on NCAP? We generally think it's a very good thing, but it just needs some improvements. What's our official position on that?
Could be an excellent tool consumers, and in 2015, in our special investigation report, we made recommendations to NHTSA to expand it to include collision avoidance systems and especially ratings for those, because there are differences between them.
And if I can add real quickly, I mean, we've made other recommendations, and we've talked about these in our responses to NCAP 2.0. Pedestrian detection is something we'd like to see. You know, again, we'd like to see ratings of the systems as opposed to just checking off a box. There's a series of things they'd plan to do. In our last discussion with the acting administrator, he did mention this is something that he thinks is a priority for them to move again on. So I hope that actually happens.
But generally speaking, the 5-car system has raised the safety bar. Is that generally correct?
With regards to crash worthing, it is very much true, yes.
Yeah, and again, we're just calling for, we continually call for enhancements to it, including today, staff will propose a recommendation to further enhance it.
That is correct, Chairman.
So let me ask you a question about the driver engagement aspect of this car, and I guess this would go to Dr. Carroll or Mr. Carroll or Dr. Bessick. Tesla allows, the Tesla system allows drivers to keep hands off to up to 3 minutes under certain driving conditions, including the speed in which this car was traveling. Is that correct?
At the time of the crash, that is correct. Post-crash, they've updated their amount of time that permits hands-off wheel before a warning is given.
3 minutes for a driver to potentially be disengaged is probably not the best idea, because according to NHTSA's figures, most crashes have less than 3 seconds to detect and avoid a pending collision. So I'm glad that they're continually refining that. Now, I did notice in the draft report that the alerting times for Tesla vehicles that will be sold in Europe are different. And how are they different from what Tesla currently has?
In Europe, based on the ECE, which is a European Economic Commission, there is a requirement for various lane keeping assist systems to have the latency for a hands-off warning of 15 seconds. So that is the timing that Tesla uses in Europe.
15 seconds max is what Europe allows. Is that correct?
Correct, for the initial warning, which is usually visual only.
Okay. And what is the maximum time under various conditions that the new upgraded Tesla system would allow before that first warning?
They've updated their system to be a speed escalation system, so that at 25 miles an hour, it'll be 60 seconds. At 90 miles an hour, it will provide the first visual alert after 10 seconds.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's go back to another aspect of this crash. The fact of the matter is that the gore area was not cross-hatched, which is what I believe the MUTCD recommends some sort of chevron or striping in the gore, and that is correct. That's what the recommended practice is?
In our recommendations from a San Jose crash, we made recommendations to Federal Highways regarding changing the MUTCD to basically be more of a should versus a optional may requirement for the gore point striping.
Yeah, so let's talk for a moment about the San Jose crash. It's the same crash, different location. This was on Highway 101, just like this one was. This was at the interchange of SR 85 to a left HOV, just like this one was. The difference was this was 85 and 101 north of San Jose, whereas the San Jose crash was south of San Jose. But it's the same two roads with a left-hand exit, and in both cases, we have a damaged crash attenuator that the vehicle ran into that Caltrans failed to repair in a timely manner. That crash was in 2016, I believe. We completed our report, and in 2017, it issued several recommendations coming out of that. I want to, in the next round, I want to come back and talk more about the damaged crash attenuator and see what's going on there. So we'll go to the next round. Vice Chairman. Member Hamady.
In the absence of NHTSA regulating and Tesla or other vehicle manufacturers taking action, we have issued recommendations to states. Can Ms. Perot or Dr. Malloy, can you talk about those recommendations? I believe we issued those after the Uber crash.
Correct. Those recommendations to states pertained to testing of highly automated vehicles, which clearly we believe is a very important issue. But in the Mountain View crash or in the other three crashes, we are dealing with the production level vehicle, and the role of the state, once a vehicle is a production vehicle, meets all the FMVSS, is rather limited.
And part of the reason we issued the recommendation following Uber was because there was a void that somebody needed to fill, and in that case, the states needed to fill.
Correct. It was really a three-pronged approach for the industry to recognize the risks of testing on public roads, for NHTSA to provide at least initial minimum safeguards, and then for states to either use those or to add additional safeguards for testing on their public roads.
Okay, thank you. The Federal Communications Commission has proposed to reallocate spectrum within the 5.9 gigahertz band for unlicensed uses, essentially undercutting the safety benefits of V2X technologies. The board is currently reviewing comments in response to the notice of proposed rulemaking. Dr. Betchick, please discuss the importance of dedicated spectrum for connected vehicle technologies. And you or Ms. Perot, please, if you could also talk about any safety recommendations we've issued related to connected vehicles.
We are very strong supporters of connected vehicles technology. I believe we made our first recommendation in mid-90s, 95, and in 2013 we issued recommendations to NHTSA to require the technology to be installed on all highway vehicles from light to heavy vehicles. And in 2017, NHTSA issued an NPRM to mandate connected vehicles technology using specifically DSRC, which stands for dedicated short-range communication, to be installed on all light vehicles. We saw that as a very, very positive movement for the safety of of transportation in general, even though it lacked highway vehicles. The most recent FCC proposal to limit this, the available bandwidth based on the DOT research, which shows that if FCC goes along with the proposal that the interference from the wireless devices would make any connected vehicles technology, communication between vehicles and infrastructure, functionally infeasible. It would not be possible, which means that decades of research would go down the drain. And in the crashes, I believe all of the 4 that we investigated today, and in the Williston crash, we reiterated the recommendation from 2013, believing that connected vehicles technology would have been beneficial in preventing that crash. And that is the precise strength of the connected vehicles technology compared to the weakness of vehicle-based sensors, which is detecting a hazard, knowing exactly what the hazard is, and predicting its path.
And if I could just add, I mean, NHTSA projected that 80% of collisions could be affected by V2V systems. And so as I've lost track of who said the Vice Chairman said, the 37,000 fatalities we're seeing, affecting 80% of those would be a huge game changer. And deciding that we need more access to our communication devices instead of safety is unfortunate.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Member Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to talk a little bit or ask some questions on data that Tesla receives from their vehicles. It's my understanding that they receive data from all of their vehicles and they use that to incorporate design changes into their autopilot system. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. The vision system is a machine learning type system. So the more cars that are out there collecting the information from the environment, it comes back and the software engineers and so forth will continue to update their systems to make the vision system smarter so that it won't steer into gores, hopefully, in the future.
Okay. Do the users have to sign any kind of an agreement to allow that data to be shared with them?
There's a lot of signatures that are required when you purchase vehicles to collect data, and so yes, I believe there is a requirement. At least I could see that in the owner's manual. There's a whole section on the data that's collected and who owns the data.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll just add, you can opt out of it. There's an option
can.
in the car. You can opt out of sending. And also, a lot of the updates are done by wireless. So if you don't have a wireless system hooked to your vehicle, it won't update until you take it in for service to the service center.
Thank you for that clarification. Now, event data recorders are not required. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And if you do have one installed, it's governed by 49 CFR Part 563, I believe you had in your presentation.
That's correct.
And how long ago was that regulation set? How many years? Roughly. That long ago?
You're drawing a blank at the moment, yeah.
Okay. I'm assuming it's a pretty old regulation, maybe a little outdated.
Yeah, 2006, I think is when it came out.
2006,
yeah.
okay. So going on 14 years old. Okay, thank you. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Member Graham, thank you very much. Member Chapman. Great. I guess that brings it back to me. So we were talking about in the previous round, I was questioning about saying that this vehicle had crashed into a damaged crash attenuator. This certainly is not the first time we've seen that. Again, just 20 miles away from this same location, we saw a very similar crash where there was a damaged crash attenuator that Caltrans had failed to repair in a timely fashion. So what I want to know is, if the crash attenuator wasn't damaged, do we believe that the driver would have survived?
Yes, we did an analysis of that, and had the previous collision that happened prior to this one not collapsed that attenuator, and had it been operational, the driver would likely have survived.
So we made a recommendation coming out of what we're calling the San Jose crash. So in 2017, as it relates to damaged crash attenuators, let's see on page 36 of the report, we called for Caltrans to modify your work order tracking system to show completion status and to include a means of providing reminders for when work orders, particularly those for proprietary devices, are overdue or incomplete. What is the classification of that response, of that recommendation?
It's currently classified open await response.
Open await response. Now, does this mean that they never responded at all, unlike the question I asked you earlier about something to the Consumer Electronic Association?
Yeah, that's correct. In this case, they have not responded to us in writing. However, I'm going to pass this to Mr. Carroll because he has had a meeting with them.
Well, but your meeting, Mr. Carroll, has been within the last year.
One of the first questions I asked in March of 2018.
Okay, 2 years, okay.
When I responded to this crash a week afterwards, I basically addressed the fact that we're seeing the same issue that we saw in San Jose, and that was something that we'd be looking at in this investigation, which is one of the reasons this past summer we and the board adopted a report to tell them again to fix the problem.
So the bottom line is 1,044 days has gone past, has passed since we issued this recommendation, and it's still classified by the NTSB as open await response because they have failed to reply to us. Is that correct, Ms. Perot?
Yes, that's correct.
You know, I was one of the 1/5 of whoever sat at this dais at the time, and I voted for that recommendation. And I take offense to the fact that people just don't even respond to our recommendations. And that's troubling, because that is the way that we prevent future accidents, is by issuing well-crafted recommendations that we believe, if enacted, will prevent accidents and crashes, reduce injuries, and save lives. And here's a government agency in California that basically has just not even replied. 1,044 days later. So let's talk about this crash attenuator. Before I do that, Mr. Carroll, why is it that this crash attenuator, the current crash that we're talking about, it was damaged on March the something or another? Why was it damaged? Because of a previous crash. You got 35 seconds.
The crash attenuator was damaged on March 12th, 11 days before this crash occurred in Mountain View. The California Highway Patrol responded to the crash. However, they did not report the damaged attenuator. Then, on March 20th, 3 days before this crash, Caltrans maintenance crews driving by saw it. They put some cones out with a plan to fix it sometime in the future. And then 3 days later, this fatal crash occurred.
Thank you. Any questions on this side of the table? And Member Hamady. All right, I will continue then. Thank you. This particular crash attenuator was damaged at least 12 times between 2006 and this crash, just at this one location. According to Caltrans, of the 8 left HOV exits in District 4, which this one was in, this one was by far by far the most frequently damaged attenuator. And by agreement between California, by CHP, California Highway Patrol, and Caltrans, that agreement was revised in May of 2015. It says, and I quote, "When frequent collision locations are recognized, Caltrans and the CHP should communicate to determine potential mitigations." End of quote. So what mitigations, given that this was a frequent location, what mitigations did they communicate regarding this particular left HOV lane at this location?
Are you referring what mitigations they've taken since this Mountain View crash or before?
No, and before, because prior to this one, there had been at least 11 crashes at this location in a 10-year period, and 11-year period, 12-year period.
Yes, our investigation identified numerous times where the crash attenuator wasn't repaired for time periods up to 45 days, one time over 80 days. And so that is why we proposed a recommendation this past summer to California Highway Patrol and the CHP's governor-level administrator, the California State Transportation Authority. And since then, they've responded with what actions they're taking.
So we just got through saying a few minutes ago that if this crash attenuator had been in working form, this driver likely would have survived. And yet, this has been a problem with Caltrans not repairing these in a timely fashion. Now, granted, CHP didn't alert Caltrans in a timely fashion, but we've continually seen this as a problem. Do we have recommendations, and I think we've issued previously, to try and help encourage Caltrans and CHP to do a little bit better job? Is that correct?
Yes, we made a recommendation this past summer to develop and implement a corrective action plan that guarantees a timely repair of traffic safety hardware and includes performance measures to make sure that they track agency completion. The California State Transportation Authority responded this past December with the actions that they are taking, both from a reporting access and also for better monitoring when these systems, crash attenuators, are damaged. And I can go over those if you'd like, the specific actions they're taking or not, depending on how much time
That's
you have.
okay. The bottom line is we've made recommendations and they are making specific corrective action. Is that correct?
That is correct. There are a couple items within their corrective actions that are still ongoing, such as they're updating their maintenance manual and conducting additional training. So that's why staff is proposing that the recommendation be classified as open, acceptable response rather than closing it, because they still have more work to do.
Thank you. Ms. Barreau, back to you. We issued a recommendation to the DOT, H17-37. That recommendation says to define the data parameters needed to understand the automated vehicle control systems involved in a crash, and it goes on and on and on. Again, that was issued to DOT. It's currently classified as open await response. Did the DOT reply in any form, fashion, shape to that recommendation?
I'm going to say no, the DOT did not send us an official response. However, it's a little bit more complicated. It's sort of the same thing that's happening with the state of California. We went to high level, cabinet level, in the case of California governor level. In DOT's case, they sent it to NHTSA to give a response. NHTSA gave us a response, but when we received it, it didn't encompass everything that we were looking for in that recommendation. Staff has since had a meeting with DOT and we've discussed those differences, and DOT is actually in the process of putting together a response. It didn't make it to us in time, it didn't make it through their review process in time to add to this meeting, to add to the report. However, we are in communication and we're trying to iron out our differences going forward.
Yeah, thank you. So the DOT has not formally replied, and therefore it's classified as open await response.
Correct.
I'd like to point out that 49 USC 1135A states that, so this is the law states that when the NTSB submits a recommendation about transportation safety to the Secretary of Transportation, the Secretary shall give the board a formal written response to each recommendation not later than 90 days after receiving the recommendation. And what you're saying there, is it accurate for me to say that has not happened?
That has not happened from the Secretary of Transportation. We did receive the NHTSA, the original NHTSA response within approximately that time frame. And that's what we're trying to work on going forward, is to make sure that our communication with secretary level is clear, that is part of the expectation.
Okay, so can we consider, okay, I'm latching on to the fact that it's currently classified as open await response. And so did NHTSA at least give us a written response, a formal written response?
NHTSA gave us a formal written response, but at the time, staff didn't believe that it encompassed the entirety of what we were asking DOT to do.
Okay, thank you.
And actually, as a result of that not specifically responding to what we're asking them to do, staff is proposing that both of those recommendations change to open and unacceptable.
Right. I am disturbed that in this report, we call out a number of recommendations that are very late in being responded to. Caltrans, 1,044 days. Tesla, 881 days. US DOT, maybe they responded, maybe they didn't, but it's classified as await response. Again, this is how we affect change, is that through our recommendations being implemented. And it's frankly disheartening that these are not being responded to. What further questions might my colleagues have? Seeing no questions, let me poll the board on this. I have a personal belief that the term autopilot may not be, from a safety point of view, the most well-branded name. Does anyone agree with me on that?
Yes.
It's just an observation. It's a neat thing. It'll steer your car, but I have a lot of time on autopilot at 35,000 feet, but I still had to watch that thing.
It's a lot less to hit at that altitude.
A lot less to hit at that altitude. So, Mr. Sledzik, if you would please read the proposed findings.
Yes, sir. Thank you. As a result of this investigation, staff is proposing 23 findings. Number one, none of the following were factors in the Tesla driver's actions in this crash. 1, driver licensing or qualification. 2, familiarization with vehicle and roadway. 3, medical conditions, fatigue, or impairment by alcohol or other drugs. Or 4, weather conditions. Finding 2, the emergency response to this crash was timely and adequate. Finding 3, the Tesla electric vehicle post-crash fire and related damage to the lithium-ion battery presented unusual fire and electrical hazards to first responders. Finding 4, the Tesla's Autopilot lane-keeping assist system steered the sport utility vehicle to the left into the neutral area of the gore without providing an alert to the driver due to limitations of the Tesla Autopilot vision system's processing software to accurately maintain the appropriate lane of travel. Finding 5, The Tesla's collision avoidance systems were not designed to and did not detect the crash attenuator at the end of the gore, nor did the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration require such capability. Consequently, the forward collision warning system did not provide an alert, and the automatic emergency braking did not activate. Finding 6, the driver did not take corrective action when the Tesla's Autopilot lane keeping assist system steered the vehicle into the gore area, nor did he take evasive action to avoid the collision with the crash attenuator, most likely due to distraction by a cell phone game application. Finding 7, distracted driving due to portable electronic device use remains persistently high, and additional countermeasures are needed. Finding 8, a technological solution such as a lockout function or application that automatically disables highly distracting features of a portable electronic device while driving is an effective countermeasure for eliminating portable electronic device distraction while driving. Finding 9, strong company policy with strict consequences for using portable electronic devices while driving is an effective strategy in helping to prevent distracted driving crashes, injuries, and fatalities. Finding 10, although the Occupational Safety and Health Administration has guidelines for companies to reduce motor vehicle crashes by prohibiting the use of portable electronic devices while driving, the guidelines lack specificity, are not widely adopted by companies, and are seldom enforced, limiting their impact in addressing the hazards of distracted driving. Finding 11, the Tesla Autopilot system did not provide an effective means of monitoring the driver's level of engagement with the driving task. Finding 12, although the lack of gore area roadway striping at the Mountain View crash location likely did not contribute to the crash, ongoing research led by the Federal Highway Administration can help identify what highway infrastructure changes may be needed in the future to accommodate automated vehicles. Finding 13, the crash attenuator was in a damaged and non-operational condition at the time of the collision due to the California Highway Patrol's failure to report the damage following a previous crash and systemic problems with the California Department of Transportation's Maintenance Division in repairing traffic safety hardware in a timely manner. Finding 14, if the crash attenuator at the US Highway 101 State Route 85 interchange had been repaired in a timely manner and in a functional condition before the March 23, 2018 crash, the Tesla driver would most likely have survived the collision. Finding 15, because monitoring of driver-applied steering wheel torque is an effective surrogate measure of driver engagement, performance standards should be developed pertaining to an effective method of ensuring driver engagement in SAE Level 2 partial driving automation systems. Finding 16, if Tesla Inc. does not incorporate system safeguards that limit the use of the Autopilot system to those conditions for which it was designed, continued use of the system beyond its operational design domain is foreseeable and the risk for future crashes will remain. Finding 17, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's failure to ensure that vehicle manufacturers of SAE Level 2 driving automation systems are incorporating appropriate system safeguards to limit operation of these systems to the operational design domain compromises safety. Finding 18, in order for driving automation systems to be safely deployed in a high-speed operating environment, collision avoidance systems must be able to effectively detect and respond to potential hazards, including roadside safety traffic hardware, and be able to execute forward collision avoidance at high speeds. Finding 19, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's approach to the oversight of automated vehicles is misguided because it essentially relies on waiting for problems to occur rather than addressing safety issues proactively. Finding 20, it is essential that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's surveillance and defect investigation program closely examine issues related to foreseeable misuse of automation and perform a forward-looking risk analysis to identify partial driving automation system defects that pose an unreasonable risk to safety. Finding 21, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's Office of Defects Investigation has failed to thoroughly investigate the Tesla Autopilot design regarding the degree to which drivers are currently misusing the system, foreseeable consequences of continued use by drivers beyond the system's operational design domain, and the effectiveness of driver monitoring system in ensuring driver engagement. Finding 22, vehicle performance data associated with activation and engagement of partial driving automation systems on vehicles involved in crashes are not required nor available on most event data recorders. And lastly, finding 23, a standardized set of retrievable data is needed to enable independent assessment of automated vehicle safety and to foster automation safety improvements.
Mr. Sledzik, thank you very much. Are there any proposed amendments? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the findings as presented.
So moved.
It's been moved by the Vice Chairman, seconded by Member Hamady. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of adopting the findings as proposed, please signal with a hand and say aye. Opposed, there are none. The findings have been adopted unanimously. Mr. Sledzik, if you'll please read the proposed probable cause.
Yes, sir. The National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of the Mountain View, California crash was the Tesla Autopilot system steering the sport utility vehicle into a highway gore area due to system limitations and the driver's lack of response due to distraction, likely from a cell phone game application, and the over-reliance on the Autopilot partial driving automation system. Contributing to the crash was the Tesla vehicle's ineffective monitoring of driver engagement, which facilitated the driver's complacency and inattentiveness. Contributing to the severity of the driver's injuries was the vehicle's impact with the crash attenuator barrier that was damaged and non-operational at the time of the collision due to the California Highway Patrol's failure to report the damage following a previous crash and systemic problems with the California Department of Transportation's Maintenance Division in repairing traffic safety hardware in a timely manner.
Thank you, Mr. Sledzik. Are there any proposed amendments? Seeing none, is there a motion to adopt the probable cause as proposed?
So moved.
Vice Chairman has moved, and Member Graham has seconded the motion. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of adopting the probable cause as proposed, please signal with a hand and say aye. Opposed, there are none. The probable cause has been adopted unanimously. Mr. Sledzik, if you'll please read the proposed recommendations.
Yes, sir. As a result of this investigation, the NTSB makes the following 9 new safety recommendations. There are 4 to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. First one reads as follows: expand new car assessment program testing of forward collision avoidance system performance to include common obstacles such as traffic safety hardware, cross-traffic vehicle profiles, and other applicable vehicle shapes or objects found in the highway operating environment. Second is evaluate Tesla Autopilot-equipped vehicles to determine if the system's operating limitations, foreseeability of driver misuse, and the ability to operate the vehicles outside the intended operational design domain pose an unreasonable risk to safety. If safety defects are identified, use applicable enforcement authority to ensure that Tesla Inc. takes corrective action. Third, for vehicles equipped with Level 2 automation, work with SAE International to develop performance standards for driver monitoring systems that will minimize driver disengagement, prevent automation complacency, and account for foreseeable misuse of the automation. And the last one to NHTSA, after developing the performance standards for driver monitoring systems recommended in the previous safety recommendation, require that all new passenger vehicles with Level 2 automation be equipped with a driver monitoring system that meets these standards. There are 2 new recommendations offered to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. First one reads, review and revise your distracted driving initiatives to increase employers' awareness of the need to develop strong cell phone policy prohibiting the use of portable electronic devices while driving. And the second reads, modify your enforcement strategies to increase the use of the general duty clause cited in 29 United States Code Section 654 against those employers who fail to address the hazards of distracted driving. We have one recommendation to SAE International, which reads, for vehicles equipped with Level 2 automation, work with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to develop performance standards for driver monitoring systems that will minimize driver disengagement, prevent automation complacency, and account for foreseeable over-reliance on automation. We have one recommendation to manufacturers of portable electronic devices, which include Apple, Google, HTC, Lenovo, LG, Motorola, Nokia, Samsung, and Sony. This recommendation reads, develop a distracted driving lockout mechanism or application for portable electronic devices that will automatically disable any driver distracting functions when a vehicle is in motion, but that allows the device to be used in an emergency and install the mechanism as a default setting on all new devices and apply it to existing commercially available devices during major software updates. We have one recommendation to Apple Inc. It reads, develop and implement a company policy that bans the non-emergency use of portable electronic devices while driving by all employees and contractors driving company vehicles, operating company-issued portable electronic devices, or using a portable electronic device to engage in work-related communications. You good, sir? Okay. So there are several reiterated recommendations. I'll read those now. So as a result of our investigation, the NTSB reiterates the following two safety recommendations, which are to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. They're currently classified as open, unacceptable action. The first one is recommendation H15-4, which reads, develop and apply testing protocols to assess the performance of forward collision avoidance systems in passenger vehicles at various velocities, including high speed and high velocity differential. The second is H17-38, which reads, develop a method to verify that manufacturers of vehicles equipped with level 2 vehicle automation systems incorporate system safeguards that limit the use of automated vehicle control systems to those conditions for which they were designed. We have several recommendations in which we are reiterating and reclassifying. I'll read those. That entails a total of 5 recommendations. The first one is to the U.S. Department of Transportation. It's recommendation H1737, and that reads, define the data parameters needed to understand the automated vehicle control systems involved in a crash. The parameters must reflect the vehicle's control status and the frequency and duration of control actions to adequately characterize driver and vehicle performance before and during a crash. And we're going to reiterate this and reclassify it from open await response to open unacceptable response. There are 2 recommendations to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. First one is H17-39, which reads, use the data parameters defined by the U.S. Department of Transportation in response to safety recommendation H17-37 as a benchmark for new vehicles equipped with automated vehicle control systems so that they can capture data that reflect the vehicle's control status and the frequency and duration of control actions needed to adequately characterize driver and vehicle performance before and during a crash. The captured data should be readily available to, at a minimum, National Transportation Safety Board investigators and National Highway Traffic Safety Administration regulators. And we're, again, reiterating this recommendation and reclassifying it from open acceptable response to open unacceptable response. The second recommendation to NHTSA, it reads, it's actually recommendation H17-40, and it reads, define a standard format for reporting automated vehicle control data and require manufacturers of vehicles equipped with automated vehicle control systems to report incidents, crashes, and vehicle miles operated with such systems enabled. Again, we're reiterating this recommendation and reclassifying it from open acceptable response to open unacceptable response. And there are 2 recommendations to Tesla Incorporated. The first one is H1741, which reads, incorporate system safeguards that limit the use of automated vehicle control systems to those conditions for which they were designed. Again, reiterating this recommendation and reclassifying it from open await response to open unacceptable response. Second recommendation to Tesla is H1742, which reads, develop applications to more effectively sense the driver's level of engagement and alert the driver when engagement is lacking while automated vehicle control systems are in use. And again, reiterating and reclassifying from open await response to open unacceptable response. And there are two previously issued recommendations that we're reclassifying in this report. The first one is to the Consumer Electronics Association, which is now the Consumer Technology Association. This is recommendation H11-47, and it reads, encourage the development of technology features that disable the functions of portable electronic devices within reach of the driver when a vehicle is in motion. These technology features should include the ability to permit emergency use of the device while the vehicle is in motion, and have the capability of identifying occupant seating positions so as not to interfere with the use of the device by passengers. And we're recommending to reclassify this from open await response to close no longer applicable. And the last recommendation we're reclassifying is to the California State Transportation Authority, and it reads, it's recommendation H19-13, and it reads, develop and implement a corrective action plan that guarantees timely repair of traffic safety hardware and includes performance measures to track state agency compliance with repair timeliness. And we're going to reclassify that from open initial response received to open acceptable response. And that concludes the recommendations.
That's quite a mouthful, so thank you for reading all of that. Are there any proposed amendments? Yeah, question.
Mr. Sledzik, I'm sorry to do this since you had to read all of that. Can you read the third one to NHTSA one more time and the recommendation 7 to SAE, which seem to go together? There was some confusion up here about some differences in how they read.
Ma'am, this is the new recommendation to NHTSA?
Sorry, it's the new recommendation
So
to
number
NHTSA.
3.
Uh-huh.
So my script says, for vehicles equipped with level 2 automation, work with SAE International to develop performance standards for driver monitoring systems that will minimize driver disengagement, prevent automation complacency, and account for foreseeable misuse of the automation. And then the one to SAE reads, according to what I have, for vehicles equipped with level 2 automation, work with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to develop performance standards for driver monitoring systems that will minimize driver disengagement, prevent automation complacency, and account for foreseeable over-reliance on automation.
So there are two different words there. I just want to make sure that we're using the right word. In the one to NHTSA, it says the two words are foreseeable misuse of the automation. And in the one to SAE, and these two go together, it says foreseeable over-reliance on automation. Right. Is that supposed to be one and the same because they go together?
I'll turn that over to
No, I have to. We have one version up here that says misuse in both areas, and one version up here that says misuse in one area and over-reliance in the other.
I have, since we're voting, I have over-reliance on the one to SAE.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Staff agrees that those two recommendations are actually worded differently, and we would like to propose that both of them end with the way the NHTSA recommendation ends, account for foreseeable misuse of the automation.
Okay. So that would mean that the one to SAE International recommendation number 7 at the end should read foreseeable misuse on automation.
Foreseeable, I'm sorry, of the automation.
Of the misuse of the automation.
Yes.
Okay, can you read it again, Mr. Sledzik, so we know exactly what it says? Just
Yeah.
number 7, since we aren't changing the one to NHTSA.
Sure. One moment, please. Just want to make sure I get it correct. All right, to SAE International, for vehicles equipped with level 2 automation, work with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to develop performance standards for driver monitoring systems that will minimize driver disengagement, prevent automation complacency, and account for foreseeable misuse of the automation.
Okay, does anybody have any question about what recommendation 7 actually says? I mean, what we're voting on? Okay. All right, are there any proposed amendments? We're going to treat number 7 as if it's proposed exactly the way you just read it.
Yeah, slight editorial change, we can consider that, right?
Are there any proposed amendments for the recommendations? Seeing none, is there a motion to adopt the findings, the recommendations as proposed? It's been moved by the Vice Chairman, seconded by Member Chapman. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of adopting the recommendations as proposed, please signal with a hand and say aye. Opposed, there are none. The recommendations have been adopted unanimously. Member Hamady, thank you for calling out that difference. Not sure how that happened where you have a different version than we do, but
There's
psychic.
There's three of us that have the same.
Okay, good. Well, thanks for catching that. I try to read these things. Okay. With that, does anyone have any additional issues for discussion? Is there a motion to adopt the report as presented?
So moved.
Vice Chairman has moved. Member Graham has seconded it. Any discussion? All in favor of adopting the report as presented, please signal with a hand and say aye. Opposed, there are none. The report has been adopted unanimously. Do any members plan to, does any members wish to reserve the right to file a concurring or dissenting statement? Please make that intent known now.
I'd like to reserve the right.
Okay, Member Hamady has reserved the right, and you are certainly entitled to that. And so I'm going to wrap it up unless anyone has anything else to say. So in closing, I thank my colleagues. What the public doesn't see is that we get this report about 30 days in advance. We all read it. We all meet individually, one-on-one with staff. We make comments. We write memos to say what we believe should be changed. Staff then brings it back to us and tells us how they may or may not revise the report. So it's a lot of work to get to this point. Thank all of you for that preparation, for the good debate and good discussion this afternoon. Special thanks to our Office of Highway Safety, particularly the investigator in charge, Dr. Tom Barth. Good to have you in Washington. And our National Resource Specialist, Don Carroll. So good to have you in Washington as well. I always say this because it's always true. I hate to just say thank you to particular individuals because nothing we do around here happens without an entire team. You see some of the team sitting right here, but we couldn't do what we do without the program and the support staff. And all of those people are here to support what we're doing today. So thank everyone for the good effort to help us do our jobs. This tragic crash, it clearly demonstrates the limitations of advanced driver assistance systems, which are available to consumers today. There is not a vehicle currently available to U.S. consumers that is self-driving, period. Every vehicle sold to U.S. consumers requires the driver to be actively engaged in the driving task, even when partial driving automation systems are on. In this crash, we saw several facets. We saw an over-reliance on technology by the driver. We saw distraction by the driver. We saw lack of policy prohibiting PED use by employers, by the employer of this driver. We saw infrastructure failures. Caltrans, CHP, they didn't do what was required to fix this barrier. And when all of these combine, we end up with a tragic accident and one less father that's coming home to the child that he had just dropped off to school that morning. We urge Tesla to continue to work on improving automatic autopilot technology and for NHTSA to fulfill its oversight responsibility to ensure that corrective action is taken when necessary. It's time to stop enabling drivers in any partially automated vehicle to pretend that they have driverless cars, because they don't have driverless cars. I'll say it for the third time. We've issued very important recommendations today. We've reiterated recommendations. If those recommendations are not implemented, if people don't even bother to respond to them, then we're wasting our time. Safety will not be improved. Those recommendation recipients, they have a critical job to do, and we're counting on them. We're counting on them to do their job so that we can prevent crashes, reduce injuries, and save lives. We stand adjourned.